Hey everybody, welcome to episode 2 of the Iron Kraken podcast. Today we have Martin Orlando joining me. He needs no introduction, but a lot of you kind of know him. He's kind of a pivotal role in the AOS community here on the Northeast and just in America in general. He's been creating some Warhammer community articles, and he's here with me today to discuss the competitive versus hobbies around the world and the Northeast. So, quick introduction, Martin. Just say hello to everybody and kind of give them a little intro about who you are and what you do.
Hello, friends, and thank you, Jan, for having me on the podcast. For those who don't know, my name is Martin, or just that good painter Stormcast man, for those who know me from Twitter or watching Halo stuff. I've been working in the AOS community since probably around a little bit after the product launched. I was trying to put together something that would take the place of like Warhammer Fantasy in terms of like the organized play events, especially like in New Jersey and like the New York City area. I also at the same time was trying to like up my painting game, and I think that kind of like caught a lot of people's attention online as I started up some social media stuff. So I've never been shy about trying to share what I come up with in terms of my painting, conversions, diorama building. I'm a big proponent of that. And it's just me having fun and trying to make sure that there's a good space for others to play all sorts of Warhammer.
Wow, that's excellent. Yeah. So when did you start playing like hobbies? Like, how did you get into the hobby scene, and kind of like what's your intro into this whole thing, into this whole craziness?
I found a games workshop in the Cherry Hill Mall, which is a mall. I think it's now called the Echelon Mall. It's in South Jersey. It's like outside of Philadelphia. And it's still round about where I live now. But there were some Lord of the Rings miniatures at the time. This was only a few years after the Lord of the Rings movies finished, and I was really excited about all of that. And I went in and I got a demo game of the Mines of Moria, and I've been basically a fervent supporter of the hobby ever since. I went from Lord of the Rings to 40K, and then around the time 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy came out, I was like, I had been in 40K for a while, and I figured it was time for something new. So around Games Day 2010, I found the Island of Bloodbox, and my journey towards high elf sort of obsession started and has not stopped since.
Yeah. So if those of you don't know, Martin is an avid High Elf fan.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much everything kind of circles around high elves in a way, but in a very good way. So he's always like posting a lot of really awesome like schemes and things. He's really excited about the new Lumineth coming out.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah. Like when Stormcast came out, like I had always been a big Space Marine player when I was in my 40K days, and I had like started to fall out of 40K right around the time they blew up the old world and created Age of Sigmar. And in my opinion, they took everything that made Space Marines cool and put it in the same setting as Teclis and Manfred, and said, "I'm sold," because they didn't really know what they were like. They didn't know. I would say Games Workshop wasn't quite sure like what the standard of the product was supposed to be then. Like they had ideas, like they knew what Age of Sigmar was, but they didn't have the ideas of where it was going to end up in second edition at the time when they first created it. And at that time, they really didn't know what they wanted to do with elves. So I thought they were gone for like forever, at least if not for a very long time. So I found Stormcast and picked them up, which is how I came to be known as the good painter Stormcast man. And eventually that will change, because once elves come out, I'm just going to be painting nothing but them.
Yeah, absolutely. They look absolutely gorgeous. Like in the modeling aspect behind and the hobby aspect behind the elves is outstanding. Like the details on those miniatures, just from the previews that we've seen, are incredible. In terms of the way they play, how would you believe they should play. I mean, we haven't really seen any kind of leaks yet, or kind of. I mean, we
Well,
have a
we
little
did
bit,
see
but
one rule, and they teased a little bit about other characters, but it's like generally it's like it's uh with most sort of like elf armies because of like they still want to keep at least some of the tropes where it's like they're elite, they're skilled, they're fast. Um, if they have wizards, they're probably going to be good at magic because as much as we try and get away from those fantasy tropes, and sometimes we do, generally it's like this is generally what good guy elves do. And so it's like I don't have a problem with that. I'm eager to see what they do because no one expected the Cow Titans, and that certainly introduces a new aspect that no one really expected. Whether it's for good or ill depends on your preference on those miniatures. Um, it'll be interesting to see. Like I have a feeling you're going to either choose bringing Teclis or bringing multiple of those sort of cow tree lord looking guys because I feel like they feel like an equivalent to tree lords, and all of that stuff costs a lot of points, and you don't want to take only stuff that costs so many points that you don't really have room left for troops. Otherwise, you're not really going to be able to take objectives very well. So I think that you're probably going to have to choose between one of the two, and it's like you're either going to be about smash and bash with those cow titans and troops, or you're going to be about pure magical dominance. Because I'm sure Teclis is probably going to be a better wizard than Nagash. He was the most powerful wizard in the old Warhammer setting, and I assume they're going to bring that back in some respect. And he's on Alariel's base, so as long as he has a ward save, he's probably going to have some serious power.
yeah, we've seen a little bit of magical dominance. Actually, I just had my friend Basil on the show. He plays Seraphon,
Yeah.
and I mean, due to the pandemic and not being able to play in like person, we've been playing a lot live. I mean, on online virtually,
Yeah.
and he's been running Croak, and Croak, casts 4 times with a +3 and all that. So I'm sure Teclis would be better than Croak a little bit.
Certainly
So
on a bigger base. So we'll find out what that's about. Sorry, what that's
okay.
about. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that it's probably a better design for him to be on a 160 millimeter base because we've seen a lot of these characters who are like also centerpieces, but then they came along with Lady Olinder. Lady Olinder is on a 50 millimeter base or 60, and she's supposed to be like the leader of the Nighthaunt army, and her power level is kind of equal to that. You don't want to create a character who's more powerful than Nagash, and then have him be able to hide behind a rock and have him completely blocked by line of sight.
Right.
Because then, like it's like the old days where you had Kairos Fate Weaver in a corner and just casting spells with impunity.
Hmm.
So I think it makes sense that because he's on such a huge base and he's going to take up so much space and be such a target, that he gets power equal to that. Because the opposite would probably be not something you want to do in terms of being a game designer, at least as far
Sure.
as I understand it. So yeah, he's probably going to do cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about very kind of peripheral kind of like rules and kind of
Mm-hmm.
ideas,
Yeah.
but also from a narrative point of view, and that kind of segues into the topic of the day. Also, kind of like the narrative aspect. He's the god of death, and one of his Mortarks kind of being better than him
Mm-hmm.
or kind of overpowering him game wise, it would also kind of not jive, right,
Yeah.
with the whole scheme of the game.
Yeah. No, I totally understand that because it's like well we've seen. I mean, we have the old world Mortarks like Archon and Manfred and Neferata. Then we've introduced two different ones like Catacross and Lady Olinder, and they're very different. I mean, of course, it's like you want every army, especially even within an alliance, to play somewhat differently. And no one can argue that Nighthaunt and Ossiarch Bone Reapers play the same. Uh, but it's a thing like if you think about it, how does Marathi play in a Daughters of Cain army? How does Nagash play in a Legions of Nagash army? Or a good example would be Gordrak. Um, I have championed a conspiracy for a while that he is the reincarnation of Grimgor Ironhide,
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the old sculpt and Gordrak's face, the cracked teeth, the jewelry, and the scar are in the
Mm-hmm.
same place on both men, or I think they're flipped. But either way, it's still very, very similar,
He's
down to even
missing an
like the
eye too,
earrings.
right?
What?
He's missing an eye also, and I
Yeah, yeah.
think
That
I
that's
think they
that's what
both.
I'm. Yeah,
Yeah, because I
right.
have the
So
old model. I have the old model, like the white metal one,
yeah,
and I have not bought the new one, but my buddy Brian has it, and we've actually chatted a little bit about the reincarnation aspect of both characters.
yeah. So it's and that's basically what Grimgor wants to do. He wants to run up and smash things. Um, but again, Legions of Nagash being the hierarchy, as it were, versus
Hmm.
Order, where it's like these are all of the people who don't want to be chaos, like breathing, and don't want to destroy things. At least, excuse me, don't want to destroy things so they can, you know what I mean. Order has that ability to have gods which are more or less powerful than each other because they're not all fighting necessarily for the same reasons. Whereas with Nagash, it's like, well, these are all of his lieutenants. This is ultimately a lieutenant army to the big man himself.
Right. Nagash he's so like sociopathic and kind of narcissistic, like just the character himself.
Mhm.
You know, um, some people hate him, some people love him. I'm a big Cetra fan, as it were, with Tomb
Yeah,
Kings, which they
I
don't
get,
exist
I get that.
anymore. But
Well, they wanted something at least in that vein. Like as
mhm,
much as we want to deny it, it's like um, the term spiritual successor, I think, is most apt for the Bone Reapers
mhm.
because it's like no one wants an exact copy. Like, I mean, I don't think out of everything that Age of Sigmar in general tries to be as a product, we don't want like for like comparison, except where Games Workshop had like something wholly original to begin with, which is most of Chaos, especially like Skaven and the various demon tribes. Um, but like Catacross behaves in similar trope fashion to how Cetra does. He is a military commander. He has elite construct undead, which behave and are supposed to interact on the tabletop in these various like schooled military formations, which is how Cetra conducted his armies. Um, while they are not the same person, even though uh, I would say Catacross as a character is not even like 7 or 8 months old in terms of how long he's been in the Warhammer setting. It's hard to compare them, but I think that he checks those boxes, Catacross does, in terms of replacing Cetra. So I'm sorry that he's gone, but I don't think he's necessarily been replaced by someone who doesn't do justice to where he served in the grander lore. You know what I mean?
Listen, in the grand scheme of things,
Yeah.
even though I might be a little salty that the Tomb Kings are no longer around, I'm not sad or unhappy where Games Workshop have gone,
Mm-hmm.
because just like you said, if they bring back the Egyptian kind of Tomb Kings in the world of Age of Sigmar and the Mortal Realms, I don't think that would have been a smart move to begin with, honestly. It kind of bogs them down creatively, and it doesn't really allow them to expand or explore new stories, new visions, and new ideas for the game itself, and maybe potentially new rules. So what I've done with Bone Reapers, from my personal view, is the right move. So I actually like it. Um, you will see a couple of conversions, and that's okay,
Yeah.
because everybody kind of hobbies the way they want to hobby. Um,
If I may, part
yeah.
of this the Warhammer setting, even back to because of the nature of the medium of us having these toy soldiers, especially now that most things are plastic instead of them being like one-piece metal miniatures like they were like 25 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, it's the nature of like the sandbox. If you get back to the core of all Warhammer, which is the Space Marine fandom, you're encouraged to create your own color schemes and your own sub factions within the grand scope of this thing. So it's like Games Workshop never wants to tell you that you can't do a thing with your toys. having personally spoken to these people at events and conventions, it's like they're never going to sit there and say no, because it's like they want to give you the tools and the sandbox for your imagination. And you have people like Ricky Smith, or any number of people on Facebook, where it's like, I'm going to take all of this 30K Horus Heresy stuff and mix it with Cities of Sigmar and Daughters of Cain and Darkling Covens, and then he makes his own like continent within the scope of the setting. So that's just how he wants to hobby. There's no right or wrong with what you do with your toys, especially when we're all out for the same thing, to celebrate the hobby and the lore in our own way.
Mm-hmm.
So will I ever see someone who makes Tomb Kings, Bone Reapers at an event and say, I don't like that, or they shouldn't be doing that? No, especially if they do it well. I think that's worth applauding, because it's all passion, especially when used to create cool stuff, is good passion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there might be a line drawn where one would 3D print an army that's kind of third party.
Well, I did lose to a 3D printed army once.
Yeah,
However, he just, I mean, I understand where that's going, where it's like it's more like take the kits and do with them what you want, rather than make a 3D printed army. But I did go to a convention a few months ago, and I lost to someone where, I mean, it was the 9 steam tank army,
Mhm.
and the general was actually in the plastic steam tank, but the rest of his army was 3D printed for $5. But then he Skaven them out, so it's like the 3D printed sort of steam tank and then covered in Skaven bits, and they all had Warlock engineers as the pilots, and they were, I think they were plastic or fine cast or something, and yeah, that was humorous. It fit into a box about smaller than a shoebox, all 9 steam tanks. Yeah, that it's funny. Um, I meant more necessarily like what the imagination, where it's like the statue Stormcast, or visions of magma, like uh, what's something that's like definitely a no-no in the 40K lore. Oh, painting up the like the alternate universe sort of Space Marines, where the Loyalist legions fell to Chaos and the Chaos legions stayed loyal. So you'd have someone who goes to a tournament with an Emperor's Children army, but it's an Emperor's Children army as if they were loyal all along, or a Chaos army that's Ultramarines or something like that, where it's totally not technically canon, because canon is this nebulous sort of sledgehammer people like to use as purity tests a lot in any fandom. And it's I always celebrate where it's like just be weird and cool and celebrate the ideas that get your imagination going. 3D printing tanks and then just using those to try and win games on the cheap, or even for laughs, it has its moments, but they're very brief moments.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of 3D printing, I actually designed digitally my own kind of unit to go with the theme of my Cities of Sigmar, then Free People's Army.
Oh yeah, that was incredible looking.
But that was like from scratch. Like I actually built and designed and thought of the actual thing. I didn't just go to Thingiverse and download a thing and just press play on the thing. So there's a nuance, there's a difference. There was a contentious moment, I think it was on Spiky Bits or something like that, where somebody showed up with couple of, I want to say like 40K tanks printed in pink plastic. He didn't even prime them or paint them.
No,
he just showed up anyway. But
I'm not going to be one to police like individual events
No,
unless I'm
of
the one
course
running
not.
the event. But it's like it's also Spiky Bits, so it's like, sorry, Rob, fix your website.
Okay, no comment right there. But anyway, let's segue into the main topic that we have tonight, and that is the symbiotic relationship between hobby and narrative and competitive events. let's talk about a little bit. Let's start locally. Let's talk about the East Coast and kind of like the Northeastern atmosphere versus the European atmosphere, because I know there's a big difference. Even by listening to podcasts, you can tell there's a different sort of criteria when, or kind of attitude before you even go to one of these tournaments.
Yeah. So as someone who has probably traveled, I would say a little more than most in the Northeast, I feel like I have at least a little bit of a of an enlarged perspective, where I can take in, like, because versus the Midwest and the Northeast, and even within our country, excuse me, it's interesting for all of the people that play Warhammer in the U.S., especially Age of Sigmar. I can't really speak to the 40K clubs. There's even a huge difference in attitudes sometimes from state to state. But like, it's a 13-hour drive between where we live in New York and New Jersey and Adepticon. And when you get there, you feel like you're in another world. Not just because it's a convention and it's like the apex of our hobby, but if you just talk to some of the crew that are driving in from Detroit or Wisconsin or Nebraska, Iowa, sort of stuff like that, the attitudes can vary very wildly. And I think it has something to do with how many people are in a club and how often they play each other. And there's something to be said about, like, I understand that space is at a premium in New York City, and that does definitely affect the available gaming spaces. Like, when we talk about like the Manhattan Club, they play once a week below a hobby store where you can have, I think it's like 5 tables max. And if too many people get excited about playing a game, it's first come, first serve, and that's not necessary. So it might facilitate smaller games. It's not necessarily always 2K match, because that takes 3 hours, and sometimes we don't have 3 hours if the store needs to close at a certain time, or there's like a line of people trying to get in their game on a weeknight. And like the store, we play, and I run the events. It's called the Brooklyn Strategist, or at least I used to until certain things happened. That's through no fault of anybody's, though. And the last event we had, we almost oversold, and we even took tables away from other events. Were you there, Jan? I do not remember. I apologize.
I accidentally missed it.
Well,
life and girlfriend got in the way.
No, I understand, because we were, well, we basically oversold. Like, we had one person who had to take a buy because we took so many tables away, and at least had things gone according to plan for our next event. If it was not raining that day, we would have had stuff out in the summer. I was outside. To just give context to other people, before I go too deep into this tangent about how New York plays. We played something called the Brooklyn Strategist. It's a very nice store, full food and alcoholic beverage service. Mm-hmm. It's near all sorts of eatery. But the space is very small. And sometimes when our events they sell big time. Like, we had 5 people from Philadelphia, including myself in South Jersey. We had a guy who was taking his vacation from South London, and he had come in and just like, oh wow, I brought my army. I'm flying out Monday, so I might as well come to the event. There is almost no room to breathe when there's 17 gamers in that room, and we had started taking tables away from other people. And we got to the point where we had taken all of the tables in that second room. That was 16 people, and we had one extra, and he had come up from Philadelphia, so it's not like I could ask him to sit it out. Like, I'm sorry, we oversold. So we had to do a buy for 2 rounds, and then one guy left. And we kicked an event, which was supposed to be a Mordheim event, out into the back of the store, because there's like a sort of like a terrace behind the store. This is in Brooklyn. This is New York City, everybody. Right. It's like, where do you find extra space for even more tables? If events like this kept growing, it's like there's no more room. And no offense to the rest of the players, especially to a game store, Warhammer makes the least amount of money for the table space and how long it's used, because of the turnover for all of these games. The store makes money off of people just coming in to rent board games, sitting to play Magic, D&D or something, much faster across the day than two to six people playing Warhammer at one table for 9-10 hours. So it's like they had to put a hard stop on how many people we have there. So it just goes to show you that there is not a lot of space for the amount of passion that is in our community. And there's, I would say, there's like a small subset of people who go as hard as can be. A current member of the Team America ETC is part of that top end, I would say, of that gaming club in terms of performance. They definitely go hard. They think hard. They work their brains every day of the week to try and get their A game out there. And that goes hand in hand with a lot of the guys looking to just have fun, roll dice, and it's the one time every 6 to 8 weeks that they come and have fun, drink all day. A friend of the show, Joe Pagano, is often there, just completely wasted and having fun with everybody.
That's like a normal for him, though. He's such a nice guy, though.
Yeah. We love him. Every person in our New York City community is loved and cherished for what they bring to the hobby in terms of any amount of skills.
Well, actually, one of my best games I've had was against him and his Flesh-Eater Courts.
Oh yeah,
during like I think your penultimate tournament that we had before the kind of like stay-at-home order.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If the last one was in February, then it was probably before Christmas. It was probably around December.
Exactly.
Because it's generally every other month. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And then if you just use the telescope to go back to Philadelphia, they have a big gaming store outside of Philadelphia called Gamers Haven, and they really take advantage of that space and the community coordination to bring all sorts of gamers together, and they can hold some really big events. And it's a luxury I wish at sometimes the New York City community had, but I don't think it's necessarily a strength or a weakness of either one. It's just that because they bring more people together, you get a lot more of different types of gamers together. You have guys who are crazy into the hobby. You have guys who are just there where it's like, don't want anything to do with the word competitive. And then you have some guys who go hard and fast as the New York City guys. I will say, though, and this is just the data, this is not me being biased because I try and make a space for everybody. When it comes to the biggest events, New York City tends to come up a little higher on top than the Philadelphia guys. Just the data's out there. But I'm sure we could have, if when things are all said and done, we could find a mutual space to bring all of the Philly and the New York City All-Stars, and they can battle it out in some sort of team game, preferably without the drama. Because the last time there was a team event, which I didn't necessarily run, there was a lot of agita. But that was fun to watch. But yeah, I do enjoy the diversity that both the New York City and the Philly clubs bring. And I wish it were a little more possible for them to meet more often than just like a handful of events a year. But that's something to work towards, I should say, instead of lamenting that it doesn't happen in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, like inherently, the game of Age of Sigmar is a narrative-based one. I would say more so than the 40K aspect. There is definitely a lot of narrative in 40K and also in Age of Sigmar, but just the rules themselves, they reflect kind of the story or kind of the character of the units, versus like weapon selection and kind of that granular kind of build that you get in 40K. So I would say that just even on a competitive level, Age of Sigmar is much more narrative driven, and it gives you the opportunity and kind of the stage to perform a lot of hobby in. Kind of conversions and color schemes and making your own story and making your own kind of background for your armies and so forth.
Well, on the notion of equipment specifically, like the game that came before Age of Sigmar was Warhammer Fantasy, where generally kits came with one weapon.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that a majority of equipment would not matter as much as it used to. Now, I'm not necessarily a game designer. I only try and run the events as fairly and as tamely as I can to try and just make as good of an experience for players as possible. But I would say that a decision has to be made if you want to, like, when you're creating a thing where it's like, well, do we want weapons to cost points for characters? You have to think about the ramifications about that across an entire sort of like ecosystem of and marketplace. I mean, of these units and weapons, because we used to have in the back of the big red book, you had all of those items which had varying points costs, where it's like and different things, and you saw all sorts of you will always see min max sort of abuse optimization of these mechanics, because that's what a competitive player of a game will do. They will look for optimization and fat trimming. So
Absolutely. Hmm.
so it can be argued it's probably just better for everyone if it's instead of giving people a marketplace. Like that's it's one thing that I found was a little cumbersome with all of the realm items, is because Games Workshop wrote like 64, but universally, like fewer than 10 are the ones that you will consistently see. If you watch AOS Coach's
Yep.
State of the Meta videos, he goes through the AOS reminders sort of stats of what items are being taken, how often, and in what realms and whatnot. So you still have that optimization, whether they cost points or not. But I think it's always going to be easier to just say a character does this, and you leave it at that, versus making a character cost less for just a T-shirt, and then yeah, the narrative, like you almost lose a narrative aspect when you have characters with the set war gear and costume, rather than, you know what I mean? Like, I think famous back at the end of 8th edition Warhammer was the Demon Prince and Warriors of Chaos. And that Demon Prince had a very specific set of items and almost never deviated, and it made him basically unkillable unless you were certain armies that had this ability to just like magic snipe him or something. Otherwise, you would never get to him. And I think that was just the height of the optimization slash abuse of making these items flavorful and available to everyone for points. Because then you're nickel and diming. Like that's the thing I have a problem with. I would say in 40k. That's just me personally. I don't want to say it's a fault of the game. I don't want to say it it's something that should be looked at. But when you have these war gear costs, where it's like I can pay a point for these grenades, I can pay 2 points for a sword, or 3 points for a power fist, or 7 points for thunder hammer. Yes, it does give more weight to every little bit that you get to put on your models, but I think it does slow down certain aspects which feel a little more streamlined and plug and play for Age of Sigmar.
Yeah. I just want to, I'm like thinking about costs and how people interpret cost. Is it a point cost? Is it a cost that reflects into your army's overall cost of 2,000 points? Or is it a cost or a tax that is limited based on the amount of heroes you get, or the battalions, or kind of like artifacts that are available that are technically free,
Yeah.
but you can only have 2 of them. So the way you mix and match them, what you get, what you take, is even more kind of cutthroat, I would say, in Age of Sigmar in a way, because first of all, you have to pay for a battalion, which can cost 140 points. That gives you an extra artifact on top of the one that you can take normally. So therefore, you're only limited to 2 items.
Yeah.
And then what type of playstyle does your army have? You know, is it a shooting army? Is it an alpha strike? Is it like a kind of gotcha, kind of Zinch army, you know, kind of like pops out everywhere, summoning things, you know? So I think limiting players to those 2 items and making them crucial, and seeing such a huge kind of flux between selecting one army and the other, is a cost in itself, as it were.
Oh, yeah. I understand where you're getting at. It's just that we're still in that phase, I think, or at least we just finished that phase of updating all of the armies, where not all battalions were created equal.
Oh
And
no, of course not. Yeah.
and it's like you want battalions necessarily to probably do a little bit less than they used to, because certain battalions, like you would be the army building battalion, where it's like a Gorefist would be a good example, where you can get that to a 1 drop. or possibly a 2-drop if you took like a Maw Crusher. And then you get 2 items basically for doing the thing that you already wanted to do. Or say Sylvaneth, for example, where battalions were so cheap, you have like a 1-drop, but like 3 smaller ones in there, and then you get 4 items, and then all of those items are just like it's you before you think about how items are going to be made available to everyone universally. You want those requirements to basically be like a similar barrier to entry. Stormcast, for example, like what I mean by that is um, the Stormcast battalions right now, because they were the first ones to kind of be a little toothless, and we saw that like the incremental scaling back of certain battalions, where it's like, well, we understand that these items are probably going to have a bigger impact on what their army does necessarily than the formations they take. And so we're going to try and balance that accordingly. We still want them to do, like, we still want the formations to do something. We want people to be rewarded for paying those points for taking all of the stuff together and having them. But you don't want it to be necessarily the old Vanguard wing where I'm going to take all of the stuff that makes up a regular Stormcast Eternals army, and I can teleport in and out of combat as I want, versus something like currently the Cleansing Phalanx, which is a Stormcast one where if you take basically 40% of your army in like these 4 units, which are kind of not that durable, and doesn't really the battalion itself does not confer really an additional benefit. I think it came up in like 1 out of every 20 to 25 games, that which is like if you use the Evocators to buff the Sequitors get an additional buff, which they kind of already get anyway in certain chapter tactics. So I think they've gotten to a point where if we're going to keep the realm items, because I know that that's floating around in the next GHB, it's like, are the malign sorcery items going to go away either entirely, or are they going to be replaced with a shorter list of a little more pillow-fisted sort of universal list of items that everybody can take just from here, instead of like,
right. Yeah. Do you think each army book or each tome is going to get its own narrative items or specific items? I mean, they kind of do, they kind of have.
Yeah.
But do you think they're going to get extra?
They're going to get more because certain books like don't really have them. I believe like only like a good example is like Stormcast have like the old like armory basically that certain books had. I haven't gone through all of the new books because we got 12 last year, and then we got another 3 before the shutdown, which was Seraphon, KO, and Zinch to finish up the whole thing. So it's like it's tough if you want to commit all of them to memory. And they locked a few of them to chapter tactics. Like if you want to take Boulder Head or Celestial Vindicators, you're locked into this item. But like it's true. It's like, do you think we're going to move those to future books where the Stormcast, I believe, have 33 different magic items. Like if you want to use an umbrella term for swords, armor, banners, reliquary staffs, etc. I don't know. I think it's probably better to have those universal items, especially if they're free, but locked off to you have to you only get extra if you take take a battalion, and for every battalion, because I think that's probably the best trade-off, because they're never going to cost points, not with how the game was set up. They're going to have to shift the game completely, and I don't think they will, because I think they worked towards this. We're not going to work back to something else to get to something where we're going to have to pay for items again, like with physical points. I don't think so. We already pay for endless spells. I think that's neat. I'm totally in Vince's camp where it's like we need to completely rethink how army scenery works in this game. Most of it's terrible, even when it's
I totally agree with that.
And but I'd like to see a lot of trimming of the fat of those item lists, because generally, when you talk about where the problems lie in terms of the power level for factions or certain things, it is not individual units. Like there is nothing, like I can think of maybe a handful of units who in themselves, it's like, this is a poorly designed scroll. And even then, they generally get hit with a thing by GW through the FAQ cycles. But generally, when the problems come up, is here's a deck of 6 allegiance abilities: the tribes, the storm hosts, or like the bone reaper tribes. Or here's a list of items, and then you've cleared. It's easy to find the best ones, and then the rest don't get touched. Like, I forget what it is, where it's like it's a sword that, or anything that causes you to roll the dice. Like, take a potion. On a 1, it does nothing, and you take a wound. On a 2 to a 5, it does this tiny thing. On a 6, it does this really cool thing, and it's 1 use only. No one takes those because it's a dice game. You want to rely on reliable buffs. You're never going to take something like that.
We kind of saw a little bit of fixed in or keyed in items where right now in the battalion. So for example, if you will run a battalion, of your very first item and your very first trait have to be like a specific one.
The various storm hosts and tribes do that.
Yeah.
I like where some of them, if you notice, especially I'm not sure. I think this is true with Bone Reapers, but it's definitely true in Stormcast and Daughters of Cain. Not all of them block the same thing. Not all of them say your command trait has to be this, your item has to be this. Sometimes they play around with it a little bit, and I like that where it's like for this one only your trait is set. For this one only your item is set, and this rule changes. But yeah, I understand where you're getting. Where it's like generally, if you pick a storm host, the first item has to be this, and they play with the power level in each of those. If the army ability is really powerful, the first item and the command trait are shit. That's how the Celestial Vindicator. That's generally how the Celestial Vindicators work. Actually, is that the command trait you're going to forget about. The sword, the item that you would take, it's fine. It's just like eh. But then the army command ability and the buffs are way out there. So you're taking that sacrifice, and then you're basically like, oh, I have to now take a battalion just to get my good item. And that's I understand that as a cool balancing factor. I do enjoy that. It's just that sometimes the army abilities are a little uneven first among equals, especially like something like Bone Reapers. And it's not even like, oh, this is too good. It's the command ability in there lets you play outside your lane. Or with Hagen, talk about playing outside your lane. What was the old adage again from Vince? So you have your general is a murder lady on a murder wagon with a totem of a murder god dedicated to murder. Why all of a sudden is she giving out something which gives a ward of 5++, feel no pain to everybody? What part of the murder did you forget when you wrote that ability? So we don't want to see something like that, and generally we don't, but it would be that the items of the storm host, you're going to find the best one, and it's generally going to do something that changes how the army is supposed to work. So I'd like to see a universal, just like if it were up to me, get rid of malign sorcery and make a list of 10 items or something, and you can label them however you want. Like, here are the swords, here's the armor, here's the swords, armor, pendant, or trinket, and then other. And you can just make 3 or 4 for each. And even then, there's going to be shitty ones, and there's going to be amazing ones. But I think limiting that pool and putting it in one place like the gaming book, we need more of that. I don't know if that was a one-time thing. I hope it wasn't. And 40K needs something like that too. You combine all of the supplements into one chapbook, low price, low-ish price, have that all, but still, it's that was figure that's 10, 12 pages of nothing but items.
Right. Exactly.
Make a one. Just make a one page of items.
I actually have the gaming book, and it is one of the best things I've ever purchased. It is so useful. Easily flip to your battle plans, easily flip to realm items, you have all of them in the back.
Yeah.
It's just
You
like
see me, I run
yeah,
the tournaments with just that.
amazing. Yeah,
Just roll a dice and say,
yeah.
here's what it is. And if you don't have it, take a picture and keep it on your phone for the round.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a couple of things I would like to see in 40K, like for example, like the Azer app. They have War Scroll Builder, but Azer is also really good. A gaming book, something that kind of consolidates a lot of the rules.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so I mean, in general, how do you run your tournaments? What is the balance between hobby and actual like match
Yeah.
wins? How do you,
Um,
and also how do you select the battle plans and all the nuances of your tournaments? And then we can start going into maybe one of your armies that you've brought.
sure.
They're absolutely gorgeous.
Thanks. So generally, how I like to just use as a rule of thumb, for 1 day events in terms of like what people have, anything goes. Um, I tend to be a lot more lenient in terms of like what's painted and what's not, like because I want 1 days, especially for clubs with limited resources in terms of space, especially for people like army storage and everything. It's like people deserve the ability to experiment in a competitive setting. And so I'm okay with people bring, as long as the model is at least assembled enough that you can clearly see what it is. It's WYSIWYG compliant. It can stand up. Doesn't have to be painted. You can bring the gray armies. Um, I definitely encourage people to bring new builds and experiment with them. The only thing I really have a problem with, I would say, is egregious proxies. But I think we're well beyond that. I haven't seen a problem like for that in, I would say, several years, and it was already like before Age of Sigmar when I had that, like when you used to see that. Again, I can't speak for like the 40K crowd when someone brings something and tries to pass it off to something else, but I really like, even when it to the big events where you have a very high level of scrutiny, I haven't seen stuff like that. So it's generally no problem. But it's like just like try and limit like the egregiousness of proxies, um, and just how anything goes in terms of like just bring the thing that you want to experiment with, because especially for the competitive players who are like, I want to try this out and I want to understand how it behaves in this sort of environment. They may want to bring a friend's army or something that's like not quite like, I'm going to build it to just like a bare minimum, and then if I don't like it, I'm going to flip it on eBay, sell it to a clubmate, trade it in, or sell it in. So I'm definitely lenient on that. But recently we took to, because of that, for rewarding the hobby. Like normally, for people who know, I have been a paint judge. Like I'm a paint judge at Nova. I've won painting awards for both single competition figures and armies. So I definitely know my way around paint judging. But I felt like trying to do just like votes, like trying to make it more about, especially when there's only like 10 to 12 on average people at these weekend tournaments, wanted to make sure it's like players voted for what they liked, not necessarily like just myself being like the lone sort of judge. I don't think that necessarily gives a voice to everybody. And so if there's a tiebreaker, sometimes like I'll cast a vote, or I'll ask like the store owner to say, which of these things do you like? But in terms of best army, uh, a lot of people were showing up with unfinished work or something like that. That's fine. We encourage that. So we kind of lowered it to best hero and best unit, and then I would split the prize support amongst those, and that would yield a lot more. Because sometimes you have painters, including yourself, where it's like, well, um, you may not have the whole army up to par, or like, here's my best. I get to show off the best model of my army, or just this unit, and people get to be able to get closer in and really look at all of that detail work. I believe like the person who won best unit, something that really stuck in people's minds was it was an ogre kingdom, or an ogre Maw tribes army, and he, instead of yetis, they were these snowmen. Like,
Mhm.
but instead they're supposed to look like like carnivorous snowmen, but it was actually a costume. It was a bunch of Noblars on top of each other, and then they wore snow to make it themselves look like evil snowmen.
Please tell me they
Uh,
had blood running down their
I
snowy
I
fronts.
don't remember, but there should be pictures somewhere up on the New Jersey Age of Sigmar page
Okay.
of the guy who won that, and that stuff he got like I think 8 votes for best unit out of like so 8 people said out of all of the units that all of us have brought, including ones that may have been better painted than that, where it's like that has stuck out to me as the coolest, the most inventive. I'm going to give that my vote, and then the best hero. I think I'm going to do that going forward in terms of um, like just letting people choose uh, their favorite of the pieces of people's armies. Now, when you get to a full GT, is where we want to talk about not only making it fun for the best number of people, but also it's like your standards get a little higher because you want to exemplify the hobby. So it's like you have to have a fully painted army. Um, I haven't run into something like where someone hasn't been painted. Like people will be painting the night before, but even then, like it will look rushed. It will look a little unfinished, but it won't be unpainted. I know people are like, why could you be so strict when Warhammer World of all places say if you show up with unpainted models to our events, we're going to tell you to take them off the table. But of course, it's like, yeah, that's a harsh rule, but who's broken that rule? Like, people know that you have to show up with your painted stuff, and they do. Doesn't
Right.
matter how it looks. Um, and
Especially
then,
if
yeah,
it's a GT and you have 30 plus people there. Some people have driven like 5-6 hours to get there.
yeah,
They spent months and months like preparing the armies. It just kind of common respect to everybody else who's put a lot of hard work to show up with
yeah.
painted things, so.
Yeah. I've never heard of. I generally, I mean, like just the general attitude. It's like I've never heard of someone who's like just even when someone tries the bare minimum, it doesn't look that bad.
No, it
Uh,
doesn't. No. If you follow the
and,
Duncan method, base coat, wash, light brush,
mm-hmm.
or edge highlighting, and you're done.
Or
That's
just
kind
the
of
contrast
tabletop.
paints.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that too.
Contrast over
That's
zenithal. Just do it.
that. Yeah, exactly. That is such a brand new like technique. What's been out like 6-7 months, or when did the
Yeah.
contrast? Like they just did it.
Last summer.
Yeah, last summer.
Yeah.
So that's a revolution in my
Oh, there
book.
was so many
I
contrast painted armies when I was a judge at Nova, because I had to like it's impossible for one person to judge, like because generally how it works is we have a preliminary checklist which the players have access to, at least like in terms of not necessarily the scores. Like there's this whole system where I would leave that if you wanted to talk to Chuck, who's the head TO for Nova, about who gets to see the painting scores and whatnot. But like and I told him because it's like this was I think last year was the first year where I really took a little more responsibility in terms of like especially paint judging and moderating, where it's like we have to start scoring people during like the rounds because there's not enough time in the day for us to look at everything, because not everybody's comfortable with leaving their army in the hall overnight.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah.
like so it's like we're still working on a system where it's like where we can flag people, where it's like if you can leave your army in the hall overnight or bring it in the night before, so we can judge it for that. Otherwise, it's like it's off. We're off to the races. But generally, how it works is I give people a preliminary score, and then the top percentages are asked to like are basically given a best army nomination. But that's not really an award. It's more like congratulations, you made the top cut. And then those top cut people are brought in the next day, and Vince Venturella of Warhammer Weekly is
Mhm.
the final judge, and he picks top 3 or just best overall,
Are
and
you
then that's
sure
how it
he's
works.
qualified to do that?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, I
I'm
know.
kidding.
I know. That's why I said uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, painting is always subjective, and the people I'd say who would care the most about their paint score are probably people who are more interested, like, or you'll never see painting like a point or two difference in painting be the deciding factor in winning a GT or not. You'll never. I've in all of the years I've been a TO for events big and small. Um, Soft scoring in that level of scrutiny, specifically for soft scoring,
Mhm.
is generally just like not argued. Yeah.
What's your method of judging painting? Basing, color scheme,
Yeah.
composition,
So
contrast of
if there
painting.
is a checklist, I adhere to that, or not necessarily. I don't like calling them checklists. I mean, like we look at them like checklists, but generally it's like weighting, where it's I would say universally as a paint judge, you look for everything is weighted, where you if you do a bare minimum, you get the most amount of points, but then you get additional points, and they're harder to get with each level of extra effort you've done. So there's it's hard to explain in such a short sort of thing, but like you want to reward people for doing both the minimum and the hard work in each area. So it might be like a +5 for just doing the bare minimum, but if you only do the bare minimum, you're not going to get any of these extra bonus points. And there might be +3, +2, and then +1, and +1, and +1. If I see these extra elements of extra work to separate the people who are the people like the I would say the middle of the pack from the average, like the slightly above average painters, the average painters, and the very top. So it's like you never want a thing where um, the rich get richer and the poorer get poorer, sort of thing, where you're just handing out extra points like crazy to people who have done that extra work. You want people to work for those extra points, I think, is the best way to look at it.
Okay.
It would probably be its own video where we talk about it. And no system of judging paint is ever perfect, because this is ultimately subjective. This is the art end of the hobby,
Absolutely.
which is why soft scores are not weighted as highly at most events as, like, you'd say, your sportsmanship, which is even more nebulous, or I mean particularly your gaming. Like, I think Adepticon is generally like the one where it's like it's 50-50, where it's 50 for your battle and 25 for paint, 25 for sports. People could argue that's a bad ratio. I'm saying that's generally the ratio of the biggest event in our country. And then you just see those shifted around, like pushing the scale where it's like more gaming, more painting, less painting, and you just play around with the scales as you see fit. Um, but yeah, I generally look for people doing the bare minimum, and then if they've done the bare minimum, then I look for more. Like, yeah,
How would you rate theme creativity? For example,
yeah,
not necessarily paint, but
mm-hmm.
also kind of I have
Yeah,
an idea. Like my stormcasts are resurrected. I don't know, Tomb Kings, or like
yeah.
I'm just
Yeah,
using some
so I
example.
would say theme matters a little bit. I would say at the end, because like if there are main categories, I would say it's your technical ability, like how well can you paint.
Mhm.
Um, then weighted a little less than that is conversions, because we never want to punish people for not kit bashing, especially in this era when Games Workshop does so much with the molding technology, the tooling, to make it these characters. Like, look at the Lumineth, for example. Like, these characters are floating on rocks. I have like the veil on the face and the smoke and the fire. It can be intimidating, especially to newer hobbyists or even advanced hobbyists, where it's like, I don't want to convert these figures because I love exactly how the way they are, or I don't know how to convert these figures. I can't really think of anything, or it's physically impossible. Like, I'd break the miniature, or it wouldn't look right if I did anything to it.
I
So we,
just paid $30 for this beautiful model, and I don't want to put
right,
a ground head on it. You know.
right, or so after that would come conversions, and even then, like, did you do a bare minimum? Did you play with the kits a little bit?
Mhm.
After that, did you do any visible modifications? And then, like, how crazy did you get? And the crazier you get, the fewer points you hand out, but those are extra points than someone who would have done the bare minimum or none at all. So that's the
Right.
difference between, I would say, if someone got 3 points for doing maybe some head swaps and some weapon swaps here and there, to someone who got maybe 6 or 7 or 9 points. I'm just pulling numbers out of my butt just as an example, but like getting all of these bonus points for just extra things like green stuff sculpting chainmail, additional hair braids, jewelry, gems, using plastic cards, Sculpey, like just went the full James Walpole and said, I took all of this, everything you see, I just conjured out of my imagination. Here you go. So painting ability, conversions, basing. It is very easy to do basing well and competently. Very easy. Certain people, I would say, are maybe just not aware, not comfortable with just doing just these tiny things, which are very easy, very beginner level to just make basing very competent. But it takes a whole lot of skill to take basing to a truly like epic level.
I agree.
Something would reflect that where because sometimes it's like an army doesn't necessarily like my legions of Nagash. I was like, after everything I did with Stormcast basing, nah, it's just not worth the extra effort. It's too much work. And that's fine.
We're going to see those in a little bit. I'm going to talk about your Stormcast, but
I think I'm about summed it up so we could like actually talk about putting this into practice.
Yeah.
And so you have your painting ability, your conversions, your basing, and then finally at the end we would talk about like just in a big catch-all diorama and/or theme. Last month for the Adepticon at home sort of programming, I did a seminar with AOS Coach where we talked about presenting your army for success. You can find that on YouTube, where I talked about the different types of display boards. Again, it is very easy to do a bare minimum. You can take a picture frame, put some foam board in the bottom, fill it over, paint it up a little bit, and then boom, you have like a nice little tray display for your army. That's fine. You get points for that. But if you're going to do
Games Workshop terrain is so beautiful. You can
just
take like two ruined corners and put them together. It looks like the army's coming through a gateway or something. You know, that's it done.
And one month out of the year for Armies on Parade, Games Workshop sells the individual realm battle tiles. It's nice. It's not technically worth them. Like this is how they get you. It's not worth it to buy them on their own unless you're like, you know what, I'm going to buy one of these tiles. I'm going to paint it up real easy, looks great, and I don't need to do anything else. And at that point, if you're looking at that, maximum value. And so it's very, but if you're going to do something like what you see at Adepticon, where people have the floating castles and the lights and the smoke machines and everything like that, and sometimes like that stuff doesn't make it to score sheets. This is just people doing like my passion is just injecting it completely into my own hobby and doing something out of the park. But to just get back to your original question about theme, like yes, we do look at theme. Does this theme celebrate the fiction, or is it clearly presented? Like, does it look like you put a lot of imagination into your army's theme?
Like Ricky Smith's army on Facebook.
Like where we have like this entirely homebrew sort of city with your own people and ideas, or your Cogfort army with like the custom machinery and the bicycles and everything like that. Or even something as simple as, to use 40K as an example again, the Legion of the Damned. I'm trying to think of, originally I believe a chapter called the Firehawks, and a good example of like using painting like a chapter is like how they used to look. Like maybe like pre-heresy colors, I guess would be a better example of. But I heard something on one of the Warhammer, the Warhammer has the live podcast or Twitch channel every day of the week, and I heard something on there where they were like going through people's hobby and just simple things as putting a twist on existing lore and having that carry through to your entire army, or doing one of the concept armies and just taking that idea and doing it well. I would say for my Stormcast, if we wanted to segue into that, one of the Stormcast have this a little bit of a nonfiction or historical sort of inspired elements of East Asia.
Actually, do you have your army list in front of you so we can just go through it?
Oh, sure.
And kind of understand the army list and why you did it that way? If it's, of course, everybody watching us right now, remember this army was done several years ago. And based on the context and everything, it might not be playable or
Well,
usable or
so the
competitive?
the most recent list I did, it was the last tournament before the lockdown.
Okay.
When I went to a tournament in Philadelphia, I believe I came in 8th place. It's not terrible. Um, so currently it is a Celestial Vindicators army. So the whole Celestial Vindicators, like, I wanted an eye-catching scheme for, like, when I was going to do a full Stormcast army. But that was all the way back in early 2017, possibly even before that. And they didn't really have a lot of lore written for the separate storm hosts. I picked a color scheme, I liked it, and then Games Workshop happened to put out cool lore, and then in 2018, cool abilities. So I felt like it was just good luck that I stumbled upon something that I was basically rewarded for.
You hit the
And I paint,
jackpot.
yeah, and they're kind of like the Black Templars, or sort of like the Blood Angels of Age of Sigmar, at least if you could really find an equivalent. But they have this very striking turquoise armor. They have this cool lore, which is kind of like vengeance and revenge inspired, and hopefully,
You
because
can kind of see it in the background. I have them
yeah,
posted up over here.
yeah,
The
lot
turquoise
of
of the
grim
yeah.
anger and respite. I mean, that's also from before they got like more the clothing
Right.
and sort of like they're slowly starting to make them a little more unique. I will say this, in the Age of Sigmar second edition sort of core book, there are 4 Stormcast storm hosts. There is the Hammers of Sigmar, there is the Hallowed Knights, there is the Anvils of the Helden Hammer, and there are the Celestial Vindicators. 3 of them have gotten their time in the sun. They've gotten characters in novels. They've gotten expansions. They've gotten extra rules.
Mhm.
And the 4th one is Celestial Vindicators. So their time should be coming soon to get more stuff. Um, that being said, one of my interests, like, I really latched onto, because I'm a student of like art history and a lot of multicultural sort of like just understanding art from around the world and how it works, and those cultures, and just learning in general. And one of the things I wanted to like just pick to make my army unique, and I just felt like I was getting a little bit of an East Asian vibe from the like the Stormcast stuff that I was reading, and specifically like when they did the Seeds of Hope and they did like the Tempest Eye sort of city, and there's
Mhm.
actual like pagodas. Games Workshop has generally been a lot about like Greco-Roman sort of inspiration, like in its art, a lot of historic, like very European stuff, and to see like them finally introduce something that was not European into their aesthetic and not also have it be strictly elven,
Mhm.
was interesting to me. So what I took over time was introducing historical Chinese and Japanese like elements into like the freehand, and in one of the pictures, I think if it shows my Lord Arcanum, who's like the general in some of the lists, all of the clothing freehand that he has on his robes, like the black and the red and everything. You can go into the Metropolitan Museum of Art's East Asia wing, and you can find the freehand patterns I took from to try and add that historical element of their clothing onto the high fantasy pieces.
Oh, that's amazing. I actually
Uh,
didn't know that.
it's one of those things where it's like it's too obscure for me to put it out on the internet and say, hey, look at all of the historical influences I put into my figures. Maybe I might do that a little more with my elves.
Mhm.
I'll figure that out as I go. And the other thing I did, because I was with the study of like the Japanese and Chinese art, came a little bit of a Studio Ghibli kick, where I was just figuring out how to just like make stuff with your hands. And so one of the things for all of my Stormcast basing, if you want to talk about how to up your game with basing, especially since I didn't really do any conversions to the figures themselves, um, each base is made by hand with hand laid clay bricks. You can buy them; they're military scale model bricks. They're made of clay. You can buy them in bags by the hundred. Um, I ended up sculpting after all of the figures, and I'm looking over here at my glass cabinet of 2 whole shelves, 2.5 whole shelves of Stormcast Eternals, probably around 8,500 bricks hand
Wow.
laid on all of them. And most of those are 40 millimeter bases, so it's not like some have 140 bricks and some of them have 1.
Mhm.
Uh, and that was also on the diorama as well. So it's like just making every base by hand. Judges will notice that. if you want to do that. I think the smart thing to do though
That's
is
quite
if
a
you make
Sisyphean task. You've
yeah.
you've said how
Well,
you for
the,
yourself
the,
over
the
there.
smarter way to do it, and Oscar Lars did this, I believe, when he was doing his Stormcast Eternals, is you sculpt or make 10 to 15 masters, and then you recast them,
Hmm.
and then you don't have to deal with brittle clay bricks. So I could go over there right now with one of those bricks, pinch them because they're made of clay, and they'll shatter
Hmm.
because it's just fired clay. Um, and so okay, that's just like the theme I approach for the army. It's like has a lot of Chinese, Japanese, Korean sort of history transposed onto like the Stormcast stuff. So the current list I have: Celestial Vindicators. The Mortal Realm is Heish, so I can get the Aether Quartz Brooch.
Okay.
My general is the Lord Arcanum on Dracoline. She has the Pride Leader trait. It's important to know with F for Stormcast, for every battalion you take, you get an additional mount trait. So if you have a battalion, you can take 2 mount traits, and that's important for this build. So the general is the Lord. I call her the Tiger Lady because she's a lady on a tiger. Current events with Netflix special did not have anything to do with that name. I've called her the Tiger Lady because Dracolines always look like tigers, and I painted them like tigers. So Tiger Lady with an Aether Quartz Brooch and Pride Leader. Pride Leader is the trait that allows the units, the cat units totally within 9 of her to get +1 to hit. So the Tiger's hitting on 2s. And then I have the Drakesworn Templar. The Drakesworn Templar is the Lieutenant Dragon. I added the dragon because their points went down, I believe, in either one of the FAQs or last GHB. I forget which one it was. Probably the FAQ because they adjusted some points because they said they wanted to try adjusting points a little bit more often. And he finally went to such a low level that it was like, it's interesting to put him in a list. And so I tried it out. Celestial Vindicators definitely help out the dragons the most because the main thing about Celestial Vindicators is their command ability gives +1 attack. And you can hand that out like candy if you have the Aether Quartz Brooch going off and off and off and off. I gave him the Chapter Relic, which is I call it the Angry Sword. That's the one where on and off like a light switch. If you choose to use the weapon's combat phase, +2 attacks to the item, -1 to his save because he's literally going bonsai, berserk, and taking less care of his own defensive stance to go just like all into town on his opponent. And he has the trait Stormwing. This is the only reason probably to take dragons in just pure Stormcast right now, because they're head over heels better in Cities of Sigmar for very different reasons. But the way Stormwing works, at least for right now, until they fix the wording, and I'm saying I'm taking advantage of this, but really this is one of the only few tricks the dragons have, believe me. Every time it moves over a unit on a 2+, that enemy unit takes D3 mortal wounds. That is any move. It is an FU pay me situation where, okay, I moved, I tapped the unit, D3, and I land outside of 3 inches. I charge, tap the unit, D3. I pile in, tap a base, D3. And I'm going to tell you later, I have a Knight Heraldor. If I want to retreat out of combat and charge again, thank you for doing business with me. Tap the unit, retreat, D3. So it can do up to about 3d3 mortal wounds before it ever touches combat, because it needs to, because dragons do not have that many attacks. And so you have the Star Dragon. And then after that, you have the Lord Relictor with a prayer called Divine Light. Divine Light is a little bit of an anti-meta trick. So many things in this game go off on 6s now. Divine Light says cast. I forget the range of it. It's pretty good. I think it's like 18. If I cast it on a unit, it's a prayer, by the way. It's not a spell. It's just like on a dice on a 3-up. If I do it on an enemy unit, I reroll 1s to hit against that unit. You don't really need that because Celestial Vindicators reroll 1s to hit when they charge. But if I cast it on a friendly unit, you have to reroll 6s. So all those times that 6s happen, you have to reroll them. And that tends to help a lot if someone like a Keeper or Jezzail's or Blight Kings. If any of this stuff happens on a 6.
I was just about to say Blight Kings with my crazy like D6 attacks. Hits. I mean,
So that's what you do. It's helpful. It can heal, which is key if you want to heal the dragon. And then you have a Night Heraldor. Night Heraldor especially is good for run and charge. Or retreat and charge. The trumpet. People keep fearing the trumpet in terms of the Mortal Wound Blast. Since they made it a terrain piece wholly within 18 of him, it's much harder to do. I mainly use it for I'm either going to make the tigers run and charge and attack you first turn, or I'm going to let stuff retreat and charge and do stuff like that. Just prevent me from getting stuck in combat, so Stormcast desperately needed. And then after that, you have Cleansing Phalanx, where it is, I believe it's 10 Sequiturs, 5 Sequiturs, 5 Evocators, 3 Evocators on Dracolines. And then it's 5 Liberators. Sometimes I play around 5 Judicators versus 5 Liberators. And then I forget if there's enough room for an extra command point. I don't. No. Yeah. And then that's it. It's relatively successful. It will generally hit you all at once, and if it has a turn where my opponent takes advantage of a vulnerability, it probably falls over relatively quickly. I use it now when I'm playing against people, mostly as like a teaching army, because it does play fair. Like, it's not like it's pillow-fisted. Like, when it hits hard. Buffed Celestial Vindicators, Evocators on Dracolines, when buffed with the synergies available at the bare minimum in this army, like with all the Celestial Vindicator stuff, have enough damage output to kill Nagash in 1 round of combat. However, you have to ask yourself, that's really good. What are the downsides? There are a lot of downsides. They're generally not great at a lot of other things. So it has that opportunity to really just land a terrible punch. But if I don't do it in the exact right way with all the scalpel stuff.
Is that Nagash in a Petrifix elite army? Or is that just the regular Legions of Nagash?
I would say regular Legions of Nagash. Let's not get crazy here. But I mean, it's hard enough to box regular Nagash in 1 round of combat, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when you're talking about a Stormcast army instead of like something like a Maw Crusher or Scarbrand or something like that. No, these are just the minimum unit of the 3 Tigers, because you can get them with +1 to hit, +2 attacks, rerolling hits of 1, rerolling wounds. And they can run and charge or retreat and charge, and they have a 12-inch rerolling failed charges. So you're talking about with the Heraldor, they have an 18-inch threat. As long as there's not chaff in the way, which is generally the problem with Stormcast. It's like, well, what do you do with chaff against the Stormcast army? Not a lot. I mean,
you just have to slam into it, get it out of the way, and then hopefully you can still go through.
I played against Sam, who I believe won Adepticon last year with Seraphon, and we went to Triumph, and Sam Gould. Sorry, I didn't want to say his name. Watch his name. Sam's a great guy, very chill, very very mellow. Him and I played. We were like near the middle bottom at Triumph. Like, we were just like, what happened to both of our armies? And Sam went from winning Adepticon. Like, we were playing for like maybe like 30th place out of like 40 people. And so we kind of just we played a real game. Like, it was like kind of like almost like a scene out of Sherlock Holmes. But like, it was a game of chicken. Like, who's going to go first? Because we both have these walls of chaff, and we both if we overextend, our armies are dead. He measured Scarbrand by a little bit, and I charged in with the Evocators. I had Evocators on foot, and the big thing about them is, like, you can funnel the Mortal Wound Bolt. Like, as long as one model's within range, every living Evocator funnels their magic energy to one guy, and it took Scarbrand down from no, it wasn't Scarbrand, it was the General Bloodthirster. The Bloodthirster for the Tyrants of Bloodlist, whatever the head Bloodthirster is, whichever one is like most like the best leader.
It's either Fettered Fury or Incended Rage or something like that.
Yeah. The one where it's like if he's ever gets into combat, he's going to kill like 9 to 10 Stormcast with the. So it's I believe it's the Insensate Rage. What's the
Yeah,
one with the
I think
AOE
so.
axe? Yeah,
The double-handed axe,
yeah,
or the one
double-handed.
with the whip and
No,
the.
double-handed axe. The double-handed axe is the one that because you give him Gyre Strike and then you do the mortal wounds and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's Incinerate.
Yeah. I took him from full health down to 4 wounds, and that was basically it after that. And then he got to pile in and did like nothing because most of his attacks are dependent on him being like at full health or near full health, and that was not going to happen after that. So just Celestial Vindicators, Evocators, whether on Tiger or on foot, can put out some of the highest damage I've seen. Definitely out of Stormcast, but you pay a lot for it. And so that's the army I'm technically running for Stormcast right now.
Yeah, so I just looked it up on my phone right here. It's the Bloodthirster of Insane Rage that does the AoE, the double-handed axe guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I've seen with Stormcast. They're a really, really powerful army in terms of damage output. I would say their weak spot is against mortal wounds. They have very little kind of answers, or if almost none, towards mortal wound output, especially like against Skaven or against Fire Slayers, like the Hearthguard Berserkers with their 2 damage, ignore bravery, 6s do mortal wounds.
Oh yeah.
It
And I would say with
snowball.
Stormcast right now, if you want to do reasonably well, you have to pick a phase you're going to be like good at. Like this, you're going to own that phase. You can own the magic phase of the Stormcast army. You can own the movement phase. You can own the shooting phase. You can own the combat phase. And Celestial Vindicators definitely own the combat phase, but they don't really own anything else. And I'm not going to say you're going to lose every game because I didn't. Like I did reasonably well with that army. And it's just that like you're gonna, if someone has the ability to just deal a tremendous amount of damage to you, like in one turn, it's going to be difficult to recover from that in terms of like because you don't have resiliency through force projection in terms of summoning or even the movement trick that Stormcast have is a little dated because you can come down anywhere on the table, but after that, unless your stuff's slow, it's like you're stuck.
Right.
Unless you're taking, I would say, a good list I've seen out there right now is Skyborn Slayers, which is a battalion from the very first edition of the game. It started as a web bundle, and then it sold so well that they put it into the book. But it's like mostly liberators. It actually has paladins, so you can use protectors and retributors or decimators. I forget. I think it's just I forget what the combination of paladins is.
Is it the Dracothian Knights you're talking about? The Decimators?
No. Actual paladins on
Oh,
foot,
okay,
like
okay.
protectors, retributors, decimators.
Right.
I just forget which variant of those paladins are the ones in which combination you have to take in this list. And you have to take a Lord Celestin and I believe a Lord Relictor, or as the hero requirements. And they all have to be when you deploy them, they have to be within 12 inches of the Lord Celestin, so he's like the teleport Homer. Then you only have to be 5 inches away from enemy models instead of 9. And that's like the main thing people do. But even then, I've dropped like 40 models within 1 12-inch circle. That's most of my army, and I'm not going to go anywhere else because half of that is movement 4, and on 40 mil bases. Not happening.
What's their reach like? Just
1 inch.
as
Protectors have 3 inches, but everything else has 1 inch. Stormcast have a reach problem in that the game was designed when they were like generally like the main army people would be playing with or against. 1 inch reach on 40 millimeter bases was okay, but now we have so many things where we're playing in that space of having spearmen again. Like it wouldn't surprise me if the Lumineth Aurland Wardens like were up to 3-inch reach on those spears for a battle line unit. Like protectors with that 3-inch reach back in the days, the early days of AOS 1, had no reason to use it. It was more like oh my god, they have 3-inch reach, but what special stuff are you doing with it? Not a lot. Um, but it's just like they don't have the force projection they used to have, because it's not because they've gotten weaker, but we've raised the bar for what we'd like Age of Sigmar armies to do, what we want to see those toys doing on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And when they come around to Stormcast again, be it just with here's a book and some characters, or here's another chamber. It could be either one. We'll find out, but I expect they're going to clean all of that up and give more effective buffs to them to bring them back up.
Well, actually, that's a great segue into my next question. It's like, how would you see them moving forward? How would you see Games Workshop adding things to them to bring them back into the meta? Maybe not. I mean, just so they can compete, because a good player makes a lot of difference in this game.
Yeah. Good world building ideas would be to finally just make minor named characters in this game. There's so many named characters in this game that are like the Lord level. Because if you remember from Warhammer Fantasy, there's Lords and Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
The most iconic characters I think in the 41st in like 40k are not always like the galaxy defining like HQs, the apex of the army. Yeah, you have the Primarchs and everything else, but it's like all of these Inquisitors and Commissars and the minor Tau characters and certain like Eldar heroes who are not necessarily like the Tyrion or Teclis, the guys at the very top. Now is a good time to just like give more substance to like the lieutenant level heroes. Maybe finally like beef out, like give like the icons and stuff, like especially narratively, like we're talking narratively with like how can these things improve overall, like give more substance to the background, the fighting styles of the storm hosts. And I'm hesitant to say trim some fat, like certain units can just be like cut. I mean, it could be, but I don't think that's necessary.
Considering there's such a new army, it's kind of hard to.
No, I mean, well, the problem is that there's a lot of units that do the same thing, like Castigators, Judicators, Vanguard Raptors. Like they do a lot of the same things. Um, Seeing those rolled into like seeing certain things possibly rolled into one, I would like to see like just like certain war scrolls. Like there's 4 war scrolls for the Dracothian Guard, which can be summed up with just equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can just have Dracothian Guard, and then there's 4 weapon options on one scroll, and then the special weapon options for each weapon. Just combine them.
Right, either hammers or axes or spears,
or the bows.
Or the bows, yeah.
Yeah, see, it's like there's 4 different items in there, and then that created 4 war scrolls. It's like, is that necessary? No.
Maybe combine Judicators and Liberators into one and just say like one has a bow, one has a hammer,
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see something like that, but it's more like let them be more defined in what they do. Like a Liberator is more than just a guy with a hammer and a shield. Liberators should be good at like doing that shield wall. Like that shield wall should be pivotal in what can Sequitors do that Liberators can't. What can Judicators do that Castigators cannot.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how you make them more unique without instead of trimming fat, you give us a reason to think why these are unique from one another. So some more special characters, I think, or making special characters that we have, like just like because of the nature of how Games Workshop creates the special characters for like these event models, because they're golds, they're automatically Hammers of Sigmar, and that doesn't have to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to see them maybe rewrite some of the lore. Specifically, it's like these event exclusive models sometimes don't have lore. It's like, do we really care about Belagar Iron Fist or whatever his name is? One of like the store birthday. No, it's you can only buy him at store openings, not store birthdays.
Yeah.
And so it's like, do we really care if he's all of a sudden Hammers like an Animals of the Helden Hammer hero, or play in that design space?
Well, maybe that's a good way to start doing this, having those minor heroes that nobody really kind of plays or uses, but using them more. Like, for example, that guy could actually buff only Liberators, so you take him only for Liberators, or like the lady with the double-headed spear. I forget
Yeah.
her name.
Hmm.
Alina Everbright or whatever her name was.
Right. Yeah, the lady with the protector spear.
Yeah, like maybe she
Yeah.
can actually buff or be using a certain tactic, or
Right. I'd like to see the heroes start to actually do more and like have more character, um, have like the units like do more. And we could wax about this forever, but I'm sure this stuff is getting addressed. There's no reason to think that like I don't know if we've really gotten a book of late, um, where I would say, with the exception of KO, where it's badly written and
or poor dwarves.
well, specifically KO.
Dwarden, sorry, I'm sorry, Dwarden.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at Fire Slaves, it's like uh, they do a lot with a very small roster.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
KO is just
right.
they're
Well,
so beautiful, and the narrative behind them. I just want to play them. I have a huge army
yeah,
of KO. I have like over 24 Endriggers and stuff with like ships and Arcanaut companies and whatnot, like all the characters. But do I want to play them? I don't know. Do I want to put all the effort to come to a tournament or play, and then just get
it's
stumped
it's
on,
it's it's very much like using an abacus to put together an army with all of the special rules. Some of them are redundant. Some of them you have to jump
Hmm.
through hoods for very small buffs and stuff like that. And
They
like,
have like 15 different ways of adding a +1 to their hits. I mean, how
yeah,
many +1 hits do I need, really,
right. And there's more synergy for all of KO and 2 pages of the Tempest Eye Allegiance abilities for Cities of Sigmar than there is in the entire book for Carriage and Overlords.
Exactly.
And so it's like, you don't want that where it's just a mess of like trying to mix and match buffs. You want something where the player is rewarded for going down one sort of fighting style or design path. Like I want to specialize in the warrior chamber or sacrosanct or something like that, and have your rewards reflect that in certain abilities. But I it'll be interesting to see, like, especially with what's happened now. Like, is that even happening this year?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We
I
don't
know.
know
I
really,
mean,
but
everyone's going to have a giant army in 5 or 6 months, except
I'm
me.
jumping on that bandwagon so fast.
Everyone. It's one of those things where it's like what makes Warhammer unique. It's generally like it's chaos and how goofy like and characterful the destruction stuff has been. So I don't think there was a way they could really screw up this destruction. So now that there's actually going to be an army of giants, and people were like posting pictures, like trying to do the size comparison, like, is it big enough? It's like, of course it's big enough. You're going to buy these kits anyway. It doesn't matter if they're not as big as Archaon or as big as an Imperial
Right.
Knight. Okay, they're
Right.
still huge.
Yeah.
Still the giants you always wanted. They're covered in bits. They're super customizable.
I really can't
Go
help
nuts.
myself, but destruction always reminds me of the Flintstones,
Oh, yeah.
especially with the bone splitters I have and everything. You
Yeah.
just
Oh
big
yeah.
feet,
No,
running with their
I'll be one of three
cars.
people. I'll be one of three people in America with a High Elves army, and everyone else will have Giants army, and that's how Age of Sigmar is going to work for the next 6 months.
I'm gonna bring Wanderers. Like, what are you talking about?
So why bind Giants?
I
Oh,
don't know.
you can take a Giant and Wanderer's army.
Really?
Yeah, you didn't see that they have the unit. They have a special mercenary rule they talked about in the preview. So Giants, you can take one Giant regardless of how much points it costs. You can take it as a mercenary in any army in the game.
Oh, no
Yeah,
shit. No,
yeah.
I missed that part. But
So your cities of Sigmar, your Wanderers, you can take a Wood Elf Giant.
oh,
Yeah,
that's
and
some really nice hobby kind of exciting news right there, for
yeah,
conversions and things
yeah,
like
and
that.
it's one of the big giants. You can't. It's not. You can't take one of like just the regular Warhammer
Like
giant.
like
You have
the
to take.
ale guzzler guys. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't. Specifically
It has to be
the
like a Kraken eater or like a gate smash or whatever they're called, or a war
one of the new
stomper.
kits.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as
Okay.
far as I understand it, it's going to ignore points restrictions for that mercenary rule. It's just going to
Oh,
be. Yeah,
very interesting. Very
like
interesting.
Gotrek can be taken as an ally in any order army despite costing more than 400 points.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
the giant will similarly break those rules just so you can like any army.
Wow,
He's a true.
that's news
Mhm.
to me. Thank you for for
You're
sharing
welcome.
it with me and maybe other people that haven't like heard
Mhm.
about it.
So you can
That's
take
awesome.
yeah, you can take a wood elf giant, you can take a bone reapers giant, you can take a chaos giant, you can take a stormcast giant.
Oh my God! Like so now I can actually build a Tomb King's army with a actual bone giant.
Yes, you can.
Holy moly! This is blowing my mind right now.
It might actually be advantageous in Ossiarch Bone Reapers because Ossiarch Bone Reapers don't use command points. So when you don't
Yep,
gain your first command point because you're taking mercenaries, you
it
don't
doesn't
care,
really matter. Yeah, it
right?
doesn't matter.
So you can take that bone giant. You can make your army even smaller.
Yeah, let's see how I can make like how I can elite my elite army. Yeah.
I mean, hey, you're talking to the person who's like, oh, techless, 800 points or whatever he's going to cost. Yeah, sure.
I actually ran in New Jersey like at what do you call it? One of our friend Luke's tournaments.
Yeah,
I
when it was still time work,
yeah yeah
or was it a Maplewood hobby?
it was the Maplewood.
Okay, there's multiple
Um,
Lukes, so
yeah
sorry. Yeah,
no
Maple,
Luke.
the one of the Maplewood tournaments.
Yeah yeah. So I took Archaon, and
Hmm.
that's an 800 point model. And then I had a couple of like Blood Reavers and some summoning and like two priests, and that was it. My army. That's it. Nothing else.
Yeah.
I like nuked him up forward, and that's it. He just exploded, and he took out half of the guy's army with him. And hopefully, I had enough models to like take objectives afterwards,
There you go.
But
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, you're gonna be seeing a lot of giants in the future from people who are like, whether they're competitive as a mercenary or not. Probably not mercenary. Like certain rules, as you said, like very narrative focused. Like having this giant as a mercenary is food for the people where it's like, I'm putting this giant into my city's a Sigmar army, and
yeah.
I'm gonna sculpt a Popeye the Sailor Man outfit or whatever the F on him, and it's just gonna look crazy, and it's for people to go crazy. Like, do you want to make a wood elf giant? Go right ahead. I'm sure it'll look
Hmm.
great. Like it just it's a wood elf giant. Go right ahead.
Just make him look like Kurnoth or something,
Do whatever you
or
want.
like Orion or whatever his name was. I forget.
Could be a woodland giant.
Yeah.
I mean, wood elves are friends with nature. They could have made friends of the forest giant. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of Age of Sigmar. Everything's open and everything's open to interpretation or your kind of creative imagination kind of like
Hmm.
hobby.
Well, that was one of the main reasons. Like one of my going into the Death Army is I wanted a Death Army that looked like no one else's.
Yes, yes. So I'm actually excited to see it. I'm gonna
Hmm.
pop up some images right here. You guys can see exactly what Martin has done. You want to talk about a little bit of the
Yeah.
theme about it and
Oh yeah.
kind of
So
how
every
it came
time.
about?
Yeah. Every time I do a project, it's almost like sometimes like I equate it to how certain directors approach film, where it's like, okay, I did this thing, I now want to try this thing. Like going further out of my comfort zone. It's like pushing myself little by little by little by little. And with one thing that I was unhappy with the Stormcast, I was unhappy with the level of visual storytelling in the army. It's like, okay, I made a Stormcast army, but it doesn't feel enough like I've captured the theme as best of my ability. And so I reached out to some friends in England who run Realms at War, which is like the premier narrative event, like in all of our fandom. It's
Okay.
like you can only like 40 people get in a year. There's like a game master for every 10 people. There's costumes. There's out of game play where it's like scheming and stuff like that. And some of those guys are very good friends of mine, particularly Mitzi. You can follow Mitzi. Just look up the Mitzi and Jimbo show
Oh, I
on
love their show. I
yeah,
listen to it all the time. I love
yeah,
their like beer reviews and stuff. They're
yeah.
just
Uh,
like amazing.
yeah, Mitzi's a good friend of mine. I mean, Mitzi's a good friend to everybody. That's how he rolls. And we started talking about. I think that was right after Game of Thrones ended, and a little bit of dissatisfaction with the show led to a renewal of my liking of the books. And I mean, I've been a writer like as long as I've generally like since I got out of high school, and I write here and there for games or my original fiction, and I really started to appreciate his approach to fantasy a little more, just like cherry picking like the style. And I wanted a Legions of Nagash army that felt kind of like I took all of these different themes at once, where it's like kind of like Game of Thrones with these rival factions brought together, almost like curmudgeonly. That's not the right word. Like
Reluctantly.
the vampires aren't friends with the ghosts, who aren't friends with the witches, who aren't friends with the vampires. They all have to work together because Nagash said so. And while we like to think that Nagash has an iron will over all of his subjects, it's generally more entertaining to the audience if that's not necessary. I mean, like, that might ultimately be true. They ultimately have to do what the big man says. But if we're down in the thick of it and we see these people almost act human, it becomes a little more entertaining. And I wanted to inject as much character into everything as possible. So, and for some reason, I also, for the longest time, I want to say since like LVO of 2017, I had a sketchbook. Like, sometimes I draw and stuff like that. I'm not great at drawing. I just usually use it to try and get ideas onto a page roughly, and then I make it to like a miniature or something. And I said, what if Manfred, like, what if you had a, like, Manfred, what if he was a Viking? And so I drew like Manfred with, like, like a big sort of caricature, like, beard, like almost like a dwarf beard, like all of the braiding with
Braiding and everything,
runes
yeah.
and stuff like that. And he was like roided up with all of like the muscles and some tattoos. And instead of a spirit sword, he had a giant axe. And that sat like in a drawer for like 2 years, because Stormcast like finally got an army book like right after LVO of like 2017. And I was on a Stormcast kick for 2 years. And I finally said, what do I do next? I'm kind of done with Stormcast. And I started talking with Mitzi, and I planned it all out. Wrote this whole story. And somewhere out on the internet, like, if people like message me, I can send them the story, where it's kind of like almost like Game of Thrones with point of view characters, and all of these, like the vampire lords, the necromancers, the liches, all of sort of like the characters who could have a personality, or just like a skeleton or a zombie or something like that, all have this history of enmity, and these different clans who have this history of not liking each other, and only the only time they ever are forced to work together is when their entire realm is in danger. And Nagash, like, what the book is called, the Legions of Nagash, so it's almost like the story about how a legion of Nagash is formed. And so it's about a bunch of tired, old, fat vampires having to team up with all of these other people, because Nagash or Mortark said so. And that led to
Age is relative.
Yeah. Yes.
With vampires, especially.
Oh yeah, yeah. But like, just the idea of, like, we're so used to being on the opposite end, like going back to the Game of Thrones reference, where like the undead are this monolithic sort of evil, where it is formless, emotionless, like the true horror aspect. But I kind of wanted to flip that, and even like to someone else's perspective when they're fighting like my undead. It's like, yeah, you'll see them as this monolithic sort of just this endless tide of doom and death. It does not care. It does not stop. It does not think. But really, when you pull the curtain away and you look at the drama that exists between all of these characters, it created something I think is truly special, and I really do enjoy the work that I did in all of that. So for the dragon, like the sort of the centerpiece of the army, I wanted. I had recently watched How to Train Your Dragon, and if for people who remember, the main character's father, who's kind of like this, again, a caricature of a Viking. He's
Right.
called Stoic. I think he's called Stoic the Vast because he's so fat. But he has this giant beard that goes like down to his belt, and he has this tiny head. It's like, I was telling people, using like Disney or Pixar sort of, or I guess in this case DreamWorks, caricatures of like these people, because their proportions are not like real people. It fits better with Warhammer because the proportions of Warhammer are not quite realistic. Like,
Well, the
even
bigger scale, yeah,
right,
like their heads are like, and hands are
the
way
heads
bigger
and they're a
yeah.
little bigger because they want the detail and that silhouette to show stronger. So I used him with a little bit of The Witcher and stuff like that to just create like this Celtic and Norse sort of undead. Like, it's a mix of celebrating the lore, Celtic and Norse, like sort of almost horror. And so you have like the dwarf head. It's the old dwarf slayer model with the mohawk cut off. And then I put him on a putrid blight king guy. Sorry, the Pasquo blight lords. But then I shaved off all of the pus and the worms. I smoothed it over to make just muscle. I mean, like he's supposed to be a fat guy, so a lot of like the skin where it's a little softer, as long as it looks smooth enough, it passes as real. I gave him some leather bindings. I gave him all of this big fur with some chaos spikes coming out of it, just to look realistic, like look setting appropriate. Again, because I'm an art history nerd, his brooch that's on his right side, if you'll notice, and this is in the community article, I sculpted it like 12th century, like an 11th or 12th century sort of dark age, like actual gold, like I forget. There's an actual museum reference that it's supposed to look like, but instead of there being a symbol in there, it was supposed to be like a Norman king or something. It is Archon's jet, like in his staff, the icon of jet, which is his badge of office for all of the Legion of Sacrament. And at the time I started making the army, Legion of Sacrament was especially powerful, and I didn't know if this was going to be a Legion of Sacrament army or a Grand Host army. So to make him one of Archon has these Black Disciples. The Black Disciples in the canon lore are this network of necromancers who are like the elite of the elite, who have done extra wicked stuff, and wicked in the truly bad sense, to get into Archon's order of wizards, and to tie him into that army, to give him that badge. I did like a Viking style badge of office for him, and then I put Manfred's sickle on top.
So they're kind of like the Death Eaters in Harry Potter a little bit.
Sort of, yeah. But because they don't give you any sort of definition of what the Black Disciples are, it'd be like, well, I guess maybe this guy somehow got into Archon's order. This sort of like heavy set Viking warrior guy is still a vampire lord. He's capable of the necromantic arts of raising the dead. And it's just that creates all sorts of opportunities for very unique stories about someone with that sort of attitude ending up in the service of Archon the Black, instead of your traditional vampire lord, which is kind of like a Dracula XP. And then I put him on the biggest, meanest, aggressive-looking dragon that I could think of, which is also slightly modeled after Viserion from Game of Thrones, with the pale skin and the blue eyes and everything.
Right.
Because I just felt like the dragon, like if you look at the vampire himself, if I tried putting that on like the bony dragon, it'd look really silly. Like the dragon would fall over because he's so big. Like, so I gave him this aggressive dragon, and that dragon does not fit on the base. For those who have played against it, one of the legs is off the base by about 2 inches.
That's the magma dragon from Fort
Correct.
They used, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, I painted it up all dead, put some bloodshot wings and everything to make it look crazy. And he's the Viking king. He's the guy who puts the army together. And then I have, like, I put, just to rapid fire through the rest of them. I did like a feast and famine thing with the core troops, where the Grave Guard are like these exalted heroes. They have like the heavy funeral furs, these enchanted weapons, and elaborate armor. And then the chain rasps, who are chain rasps in the lore, are like the criminals, souls who are too small for even Nagash to notice. Like, he only punishes them. He doesn't really need them for anything other than to just be chaff. So those are like the slaves and the criminals, and sort of like just the lowest of the low in the grand order of the undead hierarchy. The necromancer I took from Celtic, sort of like actual like historical, like Orkney Island sort of thing. Like the face paint is apparent, is historically accurate with like the blue.
That thing came out absolutely gorgeous. I was looking at it, and
that's,
it reminds me a little bit of like elfin kind of.
Well, it is a Sylvaneth head.
Yeah.
Because that's the only head with a circlet like that, which is a very sort of Dark Ages circlet. That is the head from Ylthari's Guardians. What a lot of, I think, people could do more is just like harvesting for bits. They're so used to painting all of those, like the tree revenants and those like ghosts. If you just paint them like people, it takes on a whole new thing. And I just put her head on the Dark Oath warband. I forget their name, the Godsword Hunt.
Yeah.
And then her hand, which normally has the Zinch eye in the middle, I cut that off and gave her a knife. Added some fur and stuff to the waist to make it look like she's in like a little heavier sort of stuff. Boom, done. Vampire Lord went full crazy, sort of Skyrim-like. The new Warcry helmet with the Dragonborn sort of helmet. Made a corn guy, and they just covered him in tattoos. Just went crazy. Gave him an axe and a sword, and he's supposed to be winged, but I didn't want mutant wings, so he's conjuring the wings magically out of his back. And that was just an easy. That was like kind of one of the last models I did for the army. It's just like, what? I need a Vampire Lord. Oh, what's crazy looking? There we go. And then even Archon the Black was in the story. He gets injured and then rescued. I wanted him to look a little like more on brand, but to do that, he had to get like a forced costume change. So one of his legs is kind of like effed up. It's covered in bandages.
Okay.
And like stuff,
Yeah.
and he has like the headdress with like the Sylvaneth and like the druid sort of thing going on with him. And I think that turned out really well. It's just a shame that it sucks in game.
Well, the army does?
Yeah, I took it to, the game has just kind of evolved past it. I gave you a different list, though, which is like kind of like adapted for that. This was the list I was supposed to take to Adepticon.
Sure.
Which like most of the stuff that I built. Oh, I forgot to even talk about the Blood Knights. The Blood Knights were the thing I spent.
I was about to say the Blood Knights are one of the most kind of like significant parts of the army. They're so beautiful. And
I spent a fortune making them too.
Talk about the heads.
Yeah. All right. So
because I'm a huge Space Wolf player, so just saying.
Yeah. So there's Wolfen heads in there. One moment.
When I saw that, I was like, duh. I mean, oh my God. Like, why didn't anybody think of using Wolfen heads for Vampire?
So I made this right before Games Workshop put out the new Slaves to Darkness models, which is kind of like just taking that aesthetic. It's like, oh, I guess could just use those models with the head swap, and then I'm like, done. But this existed before that, so I had to make it includes Nighthaunt bases. So Nighthaunt bases, Chaos Chariot horses, Fire Slayer's shields to do the shields on the front with Plague Bearer skulls. And then there's Chaos Marauder horsemen, Chaos Knights, Chaos Warriors. There's Fire Slayer's heads, but the majority of them are Wolfen heads because they have the fangs. I was like, how do I do a face that's both big and like fangy? And I know it's like technically I'm using like wolf bits to do vampires, and I thought it just fit. And because they do, if you look at them, they have the big canines. Just put some blood down their mouth, paint them skin like dead, and boom, you get vampires. And even the banner, just to go like extra, just if you're gonna do extra, you might as well go extra. I bought Beast of Chaos Endless Spells to do one Raven flock, and over the banner bearer, he has the flock of ravens going with them instead of bats, because vampires' companion creatures are always bats. I figured if you're doing a Norse Celtic army, instead of bats, it's ravens or crows.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
to go with that kind of Odin theme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like after one event, I was just like, I guess I gotta remake the army. However, I did end up with a compromise where I made it still about the vampires, but it's kind of like a monster match sort of thing. So do you have this is like where you pull the list up. And then I would have taken this to Adepticon, and it's a little mean. Like it's actually pretty good. Like I've played it in like some pickup games, and it even against the stuff that's really good right now, like it does work.
So let's go through the list, and then we can talk about real quick about the tactics that you're using with it.
So it's the Legion of Blood, and Legion of Blood, if everyone remembers, Vampire Lords get +1 attack, but Neferata has to be the general if you take any Mortarks. So I took Neferata. I took Archon off of that, and I made like a sort of Celtic, sort of Dark Witch style Neferata, which I was going to debut at Adepticon. And then I had 2 zombie dragons. One is the Viking King, and then one of them was a Blood Knight, one of the Blood Knights who's actually shown. I remade his miniature almost as like he got a promotion and he gets a dragon of his own and it was a Carmine dragon that was going to do this whole thing where it's covered in the shields of the other clans, and he's like become a king in his own right. So if he's double Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, one is the Ethereal Amulet, and the other one has a Legion of Blood item called the Orb of Enchantment, which is a once per game beginning combat phase, turns off a hero, cannot be chosen to attack, pile in, attack, or activate abilities. And so it's like the Keeper of Secrets, or a Bloodthirster, or Catacross, or even Nagash. And just like, you're done. For this combat phase, you're done. And that's helpful, like, against certain lists, of course. If you're playing against a Gorefist, it's like, what do I got to do with this? But that's what it's for. Then I have the Bloodseeker Palanquin, and that's to fulfill the battalion called the Court of New Lamia, which is it has two abilities. One of them is bad, but the other one is if you kill a hero within 9 inches of the Bloodseeker Palanquin, all of the vampires in the battalion and the other 3 models get +1 attack on all of their weapons for until my next hero phase, I believe it is. And that's crazy because I'm already getting +1 attack on all my weapons for being in Legion of Blood. So if I get another +1 attack, all of the vampire, like the zombie dragon bites, are at 5 attacks. I'm on like 6-7 attacks on the halberds the vampire lords have themselves, and it just gets really crazy. It also makes it goes down to a 4-drop because the rest of the list is just 3 units of 10 chain rasps and an extra command point. And you do that because Neferata's command ability is within 15 inches of her when she's fully healed or full health, -1 to hit, and it stacks. So you have this command point. There's going to be a point in time where you pop her command point twice or 3 times, and she can hand out ethereal. You have a zombie dragon that's already ethereal, and the healing, they all have D6 heals. They can heal 1 wound for everything they kill, or if they kill at least 1 thing that turn. And you can summon the chain rasps. Like if you put the chain rasps in reserve, it's a 4-drop, so 3, 2, 1, battalion, done. You summon the chain rasps around an objective if they're within 9 inches of a gravesite and a hero, and it just plays like this mini, like, sort of just Death Star, and all of that ethereal and all of that debuff, just it makes for a really hard time for some armies to get through. And I was hoping to do well with it at Adepticon, and then Lumineth were going to come out, and I'll have that.
Well, I mean, you still have the opportunity to debut it.
Yeah.
So
probably at local events. Like it's not going anywhere. It's done. It's ready to go. But yeah, I was looking forward to giving that as the last hurrah. Like I had fun with the Death Army. I really had fun, like, bringing it together. Like one of my core tenets, I would say, is like trying to find a good compromise for myself of like doing better with both painting and gaming. And Legions of Nagash was something that like drew me, where it's like had that happy medium. There are certain armies, I would say, in Warhammer that are easier to go crazy with in terms of the hobby than others. And I would say Skaven and Undead, and most Chaos armies, not all, but most Chaos armies, definitely have, like, you could just take them the extra mile and just go really crazy with them. And they'll be very competitive at the same time. And I think I had my fun. Even if I didn't do very well at a tournament with them, I had a really because that book is now one of the oldest books in the grand scheme of like AOS armies. When they revisit that, which I could see them doing not soon, but within a few years, I'm sure certain things will be addressed, and that army will be there, ready for me to take it out again. Excuse me. And hopefully, if they make some of the Soul Blight stuff plastic, maybe we will get plastic Blood Knights. Maybe I can remake or make even cooler Blood Knights next time. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your opinions? Just the like kind of a last point, because you kind of mentioned books and kind of Games Workshop coming back through the cycle. Like in Warhammer Fantasy, you were waiting 4, 5, 6 years,
Yeah.
for your army to like cycle back through the meta again. They literally just dropped 4 books in 1 month very recently, or 3 books.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think we're now at a time where the reboot is done. Like Pete Foley, who's the head of Book and Box Games for, like, he's technically above the 40K in the AOS studio. He's the guy that you see at the preview events.
mhm.
He said that they had a mission to fully be like done rebooting like the game, like bringing all of the armies that they wanted from the old stuff into giving them lore, giving them allegiance abilities, giving them like a treatment, and they through like basically this past fiscal quarter, like Q1 of 2020, they did that. It's done. The reboot that has taken basically 5 years to go from like I get that the launch was like not what everyone wanted, and it could have been done better. But we are now at the point where there was a baseline for the game, and every army that they wanted to keep is here and has been updated. It is now the Wild West where they can kind of do what they want.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, with the outbreak and everything, it's kind of like now a wait and see, like as to how their plans go, like forward from here. I mean, like everything that's coming out right now was finished early last year. So in the short term, while we might not get releases right away, the stuff that is coming out has been finished and is fully ready for the public for some time now. We're not going to see like the ramifications of like, because the studio is still like working from home right now.
Oh yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah,
And everything
and
being
yeah,
digital and modeling and everything, I
yeah,
don't think it has a huge impact.
yeah. So
Besides its
we won't
distribution sector,
right. It won't we won't see that until like we're talking like next winter, not like 2020. We're talking like the end of 2021.
Right.
Um, but like now, because they can do whatever they want, it's like they no longer have an obligation to keep up with updating certain things where it's like, well, my old world stuff didn't get a book yet, or Lizardmen haven't gotten a book yet. That all of those requirements have been met. So I'm really looking forward to what they do in terms of uh, not only new armies, but I'd like to see. I think we might see an equivalent to Psychic Awakening, because they've been doing it here and there, like a little more piecemeal. Like we got like almost like once a year. Like we got Forbidden Power was like the main thing last year.
Okay.
Wrath of the Ever Chosen we already got. Where it's like you're telling more. I think a company like Games Workshop wants to get to that model where you're putting out content which creates something for everybody, and you only have to release a few miniatures for an army, um, and then tell a cool story, which creates that. You know what I mean? Like it's like Psychic Awakening. You forward the story, you release a handful of character miniatures, you plug some holes, you spend more time like on like, well, what do Daughters of Cain not have that we want to make right now without completely updating and retooling their faction.
Of
And
course.
you will get stuff where it's like our daughters are like Daughters of Cain, I believe now is one of the oldest books. Like no, it's Nurgle and then Doc. So technically, like if you wanted to update Nurgle this year, maybe you'll see something like that.
Right. Would you see just updates, or do you think
Oh,
we're
both.
gonna be see like brand new armies maybe kind of
Yeah.
being developed? Like, would you
Well,
say
yeah.
more armies are in the pipeline, or?
I don't know. I think we're almost at. I don't want to say because Age of Sigmar. It's like 40K hasn't added a new army in terms of what was not previously explored within its lore since Tau, which is like 2002. Everything else, because of the stability and the breadth of the lore that games were like. I think that time is actually coming soon, where they release a brand new army. Like I think all of the pre-fall Eldar, the Blackstone Fortress stuff, I think is leading to some sort of new alien sort of machine army. We'll see. That's just my hunch. It could not be. It could be that they're just like making an expansion for Eldar. I don't know. I'd kind of be sad if they did that. But there's definitely more opportunity to just create new stuff out of the blue.
Maybe the old ones are coming back. I don't know.
We still have all of Dark Elves, like because Malekith. We don't really have like orc gods. Like we have like the various destruction tribes, but we haven't really explored like deities in the destruction sort of like sphere. Like Gordrak is the only thing, and even then, he's a character variant of already the big Maw Crusher guy.
Sure.
We could explore more death stuff. We can explore obviously more Stormcast, but there could be something completely new. And the sky is the limit in terms of what our imagination has for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to really guess because we could go in too many different directions.
Of course,
but I think the safest thing, even though it's still like pretty wild and takes a while, is an equivalent to Psychic Awakening, where you have these installment of narrative sort of things which take place over a 10 to 12 month period, where everybody gets everyone takes their turn getting a book with story, new rules, and a handful of models. It takes the pressure off of the sculptors because then it's like they get to take their time designing something that's key for an army. They don't have to worry about, okay, well, if we're updating Nurgle and we want to make more models, I have to make 3, 4, 5 new units. Like that's a lot of work. You're still going to see that. Like armies that need it probably are like Daughters of Cain, Flesh Eater Courts, like armies with low rosters, like low model count rosters, would be good for getting more units out there if you wanted to make a whole new book.
Fire Slayers.
No, but it's
some
hard.
cavalry or something would be nice.
Yeah, it's still hard to think about though because with everything getting an update last year, it's like what does too soon mean to rule it out from getting an update? Mm-hmm. Since they've gotten rid of all of these patterns we're used to, it's your guess is as good as mine. So it's
some wood elf or dark elf kind of contingent, but I mean dark elves are kind of like Daughters of Cain, you know.
Not necessarily, and that's a good point. Is that
they're a cult, like a sub branch, yeah.
Well, they wanted to make everything like their own. Like Malekith and Morathi are not in the same army. Tyrion and Teclis are not in the same army, or at least they're not for right now. And Deepkin didn't exist before, and now they're their own thing. So it's important to think about. Elves have always been an over represented sort of trope within the Warhammer roster. Like even though they're supposed to be elite, like this fading people, you have 3 armies for them, and that's like humans. Back in Warhammer Fantasy only had 2. Even then, it was basically only the Empire. Bretonnia didn't get an update for decades. Dwarves. You didn't have evil dwarves. You didn't have fire slayers. Dwarves were one army.
Yeah. Well, you had the chaos dwarves, but they were kind of like not really.
But still, it's like
they're
elves
just dwarves.
Elves have 3 armies, and now you're telling me that because Sylvaneth, they're effectively, I know what elf army they have. Like Alariel is
absolutely
an elf. It's like so you have Sylvaneth, you have Deepkin, you have Lumineth, which don't have Tyrion in them. So you're at the very least you're getting another expansion later on, but that army basically doubles in size. Well, you get a separate book on top of that. Morathi is trying to become a god herself, and they deliberately wanted to make all of the stuff that's not Nagarathi, all of the Cain stuff, its own thing. Sylvaneth, Ideneth never existed before. Lumineth, and Doc. You already have 4. Tyrion needs an army. Malekith / Malarian needs an army. And what are you going to do with the Kurnothi, the stuff that's in the Beastgrave box? Mm-hmm. Like, there's I don't think there's reason to doubt that an Orion miniature is going to come in some big way, and then be the counter to the Alariel sort of just the spirits of the forest type thing. So that's
Right.
like almost 7 elf armies.
One could be flora and one could be fauna. Honestly, like I mean, I'm not saying
Right,
that as a joke, but like one
right,
could
right.
be
Oh yeah,
like
just like the
nature's,
whole ultra Celtic wild hunt sort of thing with all of the yeah, totally. That's what I'm thinking it's going to look like if that comes to pass. Like we could get a thing where later on, how war clans used to be Iron Jaws and Bone Splitters used to be their own book. We could get to a point where they release like the Kurnothi thing, and they take all of Sylvaneth and all of that lore, and they throw it into a mega Wood Elf book, just to
yeah,
consolidate it even further.
because in the lore, Alariel and Orion were husband and wife, the king and queen of the woods. So
That's
maybe
Ariel, not a L'Oreal.
yeah,
It's
I
different.
know, yeah,
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
Ariel.
yeah. Well,
But
it's
and the Oak of Ages, they used to go in there,
yeah.
get reborn every. But I'm just saying maybe Kurnoth could be the thing, kind of the balancing factor between like Alariel,
Oh yeah. No, I could
So
totally see that. It's just one of those things where like elves are almost going to be like the new Imperium, where because in 40K the Imperium has the majority of armies between Space Marines, Guards, Sisters of Battle, Inquisition, stuff like that. But now we're getting to this weird place where even the Stormcast are the poster boys. Like most of Order is going to end up being elves, and I guess kind of by the pattern they're laying out for us. So if you're an elf fan, I think, at least from my perspective, what I'm seeing, like there's going to be an elf army for you. Good guys, bad guys, Shri guys. Yeah,
yeah,
so that's what will we see any of that this year? I doubt it. I think 2021 is when if you've been waiting for Malekith, I think that's next year.
yeah,
There's no
yeah.
no.
We kind of saw the Underworld's warband just previewed
Oh
recently
yeah, even that,
with
that's more Daughters of Cain. I mean, like
yeah,
yeah, we're exploring different aspects of that look. We're digging deeper into the realm of shadow, but that's still specifically Cain. And Marathi now works alone. She like they've developed this whole thing where she's specifically it's like, no, I want to be a god. I don't want to be outside. I don't want to be in the shadow, no pun intended, of my son.
hmm
So I want to be my own boss,
right,
like again. And she's technically, excluding the Slan, the oldest character in. We're talking about age is relative in the Warhammer lore. She's older than Nagash. She's older than Tekla. She's older than her son, of course. And she wants what's rightfully hers. So they're building up to the point where it's like Daughters of Cain will never be in a Dark Elf army. She is intent on making that her own.
absolutely.
The question is, what do you do with Malekith now? If
Yeah,
he's unfettered by her and the
this
whole realm of
is
shadow, yeah,
this is pure speculation, but I was talking to one of my buddies, Brian, and we're thinking that maybe 4 orders, I mean 4 allegiances,
mm-hmm.
is too limiting in terms
Yeah,
of variety or kind of nuance. So maybe they would break up the orders, separate them, and maybe
yeah.
each army will take a realm
No,
allegiance.
I totally understand. Oh yeah, I can get something like that because it's like you have to ask yourself, like when we were talking earlier, it's like, well, if you don't want to blow stuff up, if you don't want to give it to the dark gods, and you're breathing, then you're in order. But that umbrella is too large
Exactly.
because, and it's like, well, how are Stormcast and Daughters of Cain on the same side? It's
Mm,
like, well, technically, an important thing to remember is that all elves always hate chaos. Like at the dawn of time, there were the lizard men, and then after that, I'm sorry, lizard men and chaos demons, and then after that was the elves. So it's the lizard men and the elves and the chaos demons. Even after the sundering, it was still lizard men, good guy elves, bad guy elves, chaos demons. Like even the dark elves always hated chaos. They might have been registered as a bad guy for the purposes of allegiances, but
mhm.
they're like yeah, and even dark elves when they're supposed to be like one with nature, it's like even the Daughters of Cain have a wicked relationship with nature and the creatures of the wild. Granted, they are like the hellish creatures of Greek mythology with the serpent and the harpy, but you still have those motifs there that chaos does not.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I understand what you're saying, where it's like we need to separate order in terms of peace and dominion.
Yeah, we need
Because
more grayscale, because everything is
yeah,
just a little bit too like, okay, if you hate chaos and you're not a dead guy, then
uh-huh,
you're in order, like you just said. But
yeah,
then again, there are living cities in the realm of Shaiish ruled by Nagash. So
right.
maybe we do see this death cult,
Oh
of
yeah, like
elves.
because even in the very first audiobooks for Age of Sigmar, you had Stormcast helping out pilgrims of Nagash. Granted, Nagash was still like slumbering or like not he was not conscious, or he became like a force of nature because Archon like cut him in half. Archaon cut him in half. Um, and so these guys were like working relatively together. Um, because at least in the kind of sketched in, not quite detailed prologue of the Age of Sigmar after the end times, there was the Age of Myth, and it was sort of like a Super Friends thing where all of the different gods. Oh yeah,
Yeah, no, I know,
Tyrion,
like the
Teclis, all
pantheon,
these,
like the
and
pantheon of
yes, the
all the
pantheon
allegiance. Yeah.
until Nagash betrayed everybody. But it's like, is that really a Horus Heresy moment? No, because oh my God, Skeletor betrayed us. What do we
Mm.
do? My heart is broken. You have caused a great schism in our civilization. No, you haven't. The guy who wants everybody to be dead and serve him betrayed us by doing his own thing. Yeah, uh, yeah, um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So it's like big deal. So, but we still have the problem of fire dwarves, soul-eating pirate elves, Stormcast, and now the Lumineth, all under one alliance. And what do you do to make it feel like, at least from a bird's eye view, that there is more of a difference between the Order armies? And that's I think what you're getting at. I think you just need to choose one word. Or it's like I think it's like security versus dominion. Like security, I want to create a place for my people to live in prosperity, and dominion is I'm not chaos, I'm not death, I'm not destruction, but I want to rule. And that's what the dark elves. That's what I you could like if you wanted to explore that, you could argue like nickel and dime who deserves to be in one category or the other. Does it go by realm? Maybe. I don't think that one realm is supposed to be more powerful than any of the others. Um, a
No, I
friend of
totally agree with you. But like for example, if you do open up the realms instead of the order and allegiances of and the dominion, as you say, realm of fire, you got your fire slayers. The realm of shadow or the realm of death, you might have daughters of Cain. Death.
yeah,
Legions of
yeah,
Nagash.
yeah.
So therefore, like you have the 9 different nuances versus 4.
Well, one thing that has to happen first is Azir needs to no longer be safe, and that's one of the main things they've been keeping to right now. I'm not sure how I would feel if they actually did this, but our mutual friend Dan Caravan has been saying that, and I can understand where this theory is coming from, that eventually they're going to break through the gates to Azir,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to like make it so there's fighting for the first time in who knows how many thousands of years, and like Gordrak or like the orcs in general are going to break through the realm gates or find a secret passageway, and there's going to be a big wall that so you're finally going to be able to have like time of war rules for like the realm of Azir. You're going to have Azir items, etc.
Or maybe Skaven. I don't know, because they
Yeah,
use Gnawholes as their own kind of personal realm
yeah.
gates. So
Orcs haven't had the opportunity to really be like the main antagonists yet. Like
yeah, right.
we had Order versus Chaos for Arc One, and now we're in Arc Two, which is sort of like Order versus Death. And so I think if you want to do Arc Three, like you want to make Destruction be sort of like the main antagonists
Mm-hmm.
for a little while, like to keep that wheel going. You're always gonna have Order be the protagonist. Like this is still a Warhammer game. Like
Yeah.
the forces of Order no matter how you split those hairs, are going to be like the main sort of protagonists that you show to your audience. Um, and then it's like it just switches between Archaon, Nagash, and we need an antagonist, I think, to in Destruction, and I think Gordrak is going to be that one. And we have to finally, like, do we confirm the conspiracy that's Grimgor? Do we give him his own lore? Do we do a little of everything? But like, he has to be brought to the fore as the main villain for the next saga, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of food for thought right there, you know, and I don't think we're gonna solve anything on this episode,
Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely a very interesting thing to talk about. We're gonna like start wrapping it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I have three questions that I want to ask every guest that comes onto the podcast and the show.
Yeah.
Based on your armies, not really kind of the game mechanics, but based on your armies, what if you would keep one thing that could never change, what would it be?
If I could keep one thing, like as in, like as
Either
it did,
like a lore, or something that you love about your armies
yeah.
specifically.
Um,
So, for example, say like you keep your Stormcast army, right? Like in the Stormcast, what is the one thing that actually kind of defines the character of the army? Be it like a rule,
yeah.
like an ability, or like a lore or
Oh,
something,
I mean, I
and
probably
you
would
could
say,
never change it
yeah.
again.
I really do like the how they're implementing the Stormhost so far. I don't know how I feel if they were to suddenly try and make them more like Space Marines and build them out into their individual supplements, and that creates this whole new level of bloat. I don't think that they're going to do that. I think they've learned their lesson from the 40K studio in doing that, because we've seen the headache that we've had from Imperial Fists, Iron Hands, where it's like, but I'd like to see them maintain this incremental development of the Stormhosts, give them a little more lore, maybe like coats of arms and stuff like that. But in terms of keeping, as in like you're on the right track so far, keep going with it. Is how they're the Stormhost sort of chapter tactics rules. I really appreciate those.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
a very good answer. I really like it, because then yeah, because once you start subdividing the armies into different army books or different tomes,
yeah,
then you get
because then you
into
have to
the
manage the balance for all of them.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
that kind of gets into like dangerous territory a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the second question is, who's your MVP of the game?
Like my MVP so far, like in
Yeah,
all of the games I've played.
exactly.
It would probably be the Celestial Vindicators, Evocators, like be them on foot or on the Dracolines. Just how like they at least just the amount of damage output and the reach they can get. I've never been disappointed with what they can do. Just overall, I really appreciate them. They're excellent looking models. They do exactly what they say on the tin, where it's like, I'm going to hit you hard, and then I'm going to zap you with magic, and I can cast spells to buff myself and other people. We're all good.
Nice, nice.
Yeah,
It's good to get what you expect when you open up a box, you know?
yeah. Oh yeah. They did not disappoint. The Celestial Vindicators just make it even just crazier. I really appreciate that. I hope to find similar excitement when I start cracking the rules for the elves.
Okay, nice, excellent. And last question: who is your least kind of favorite thing? Like, what's the disappointment that you would change in the
Out of the game,
in yeah.
I wish that they implemented terrain, not how people interact with terrain,
Okay.
and the way that terrain is made in terms of Games Workshop's business model. I think leaves a lot to be desired on the Age of Sigmar side. Um, there's a whole list of reasons why this stuff has to be a little more modular, so it can be like kind of like Legos, where you
Hmm.
can play with walls and floors rather than sort of characterful like hills and castles and something like that. And it's a little more high fantasy Greco-Roman style stuff. But I just wish that when I go get terrain for my events or like for my tables and scenery, it's generally not always Games Workshop stuff. Like I love their kits. Like I love the ziggurats. Like I have a mountain of it upstairs in my storeroom. And like when I start putting that together for the Claymore event, whether it's this year or next year or something else entirely. I have no problem mass producing that for people. But in terms of really selling that medieval Europe inspired fantasy feel, I feel that they've really walked away from that, and they did not have to. All of the township sort of kits that were around for Warhammer Fantasy, it's like I don't know why they got rid of those. There's no reason you had to do that.
Because technically, in the illustrations that you see, you still have them.
Yeah,
and you could also like the Asian themed pagodas and stuff. They could build upon that.
Oh yeah, and I understand like there could be something you do for that, but I think there's just more of a missed opportunity and keeping those low fantasy elements in the game, specifically like for scenery and like blocking. Like it's very hard for like they have all of the stuff where vertical combat is important, but then the rules for vertical combat and moving models up walls is just so like there basically aren't rules for it, and it leads to so many exceptions and problems. And like if I have to draw a diagram to figure this out,
right,
it definitely it leaves room for improvement. And that's the one thing I always just like lament, because they make such incredible scenery for 40K, and they don't even just make more factory stuff like they made the whole factory district a few years ago. They made the Tau's sort of shield wall and the towers. They made the Eldar sort of Death World forest and everything, and they're making great player scenery for a lot of the factions. While I wish it had different mechanics, it's still like I wish they would just make sort of special, less modular kits where it's like, yeah, only a person's going to buy one, but you don't have to make it that big either. You don't have to make it like the Fortress of Redemption for 40K, the Dark Angels Fortress, like $140. You don't have to do that. You can make a smaller thing like the Elrond, the Rohan houses. Like Lord of the Rings has so much stuff now. I was like begging to Games Workers, like make Rivendell terrain, make real elven houses so we can use those. We already use the Lake Town houses.
Those Lake Town houses are absolutely amazing.
Yeah. We already use the Osgiliath ruins. We already use we now use the Rohan houses. Doesn't matter if they're scale. Scale doesn't necessarily matter when you're making scattered terrain for this game. It's not like we're counting how many models can go inside a house, how high doors are. Like we want our tables to look more varied than the occasional like old the Ophidian archway or the realm gates and the ziggurats. The ziggurats are cool. And again, I have a lot of them. They're a T.O.'s dream, where it's like a hill I can put stuff on top, blocks line of sight. They stack when I put them in a box.
Yeah,
that's great. But when it lacks character on a grand scale, and I think that we need more pieces that return to the not necessarily old world flavor, but feel like they're not intended to be modular either.
Yeah, so maybe like some plebeian houses or a village or something that kind of brings in the
stuff like the Skullvane
average Joe. Yeah,
remember the Skullvane Manse? Like they discontinued that. Like it was discontinued for the longest time. They brought it back the circulation for like a year and a half. Like I have 2 of them. I haven't built them yet, but it's like more stuff like that where it's a centerpiece like that. Because when you say plebeian houses, it's like it needs to be a little more than that. You know what I mean? Like, because if you just have a house, it's like I could cover a board in houses. There needs to be more than just houses. Like make
of course.
Yeah.
No, I just mean bring the mundane world into the game itself, But again, like be truthful to the narrative, Like let's read. Okay, these people come from the world of Gyran, right? And what do their houses look like? What do their architecture looks like? That just brings a lot of like flavor and lore into the games, on the battlefields,
Yeah. No, but that would say it's like my main like ongoing like thing where it's like just more characterful terrain.
Okay, nice. And these would have special rules to themselves, or would they implement like a kind of overall, like in Warhammer Fantasy, they had the hill. Okay, like when you're on top of the hill versus on the bottom of the hill. Are you charging up the hill or down the hill?
I always thought that was just too much bloat. Like you can always use the rules. Like all of this stuff has rules, and they write rules for it, and you can use that. Like, but you can make up your own stuff. Or it's like, but I generally like garrisoning leads to some of the most horrendously broken stuff back in 8th. So it's like I'm not talking like, sure, you can use that, but I just like to see, like, I want more of the visual impact in terms of what sort of scenery we're using when we're telling our stories with our Warhammer models, like in just more unique imagery. Is one of the, like, especially in the Azerite ruins, it just looks like more Sigmar stuff, like a little broken up and sort of ruined. Like, where's our death scenery? Where's our Cainite scenery? Like, in terms of not necessarily like linked to that faction,
right?
But like stuff that is impacted, like by the talking about like the people who live in different realms. What does a realm of like a realm of death sort of castle look like?
Right.
And we could hem and haw about this the whole night. Where, like, do we think about how can it also be a universal kit that we can sell? I think that's inherently the problem. I think we need more stuff like the penumbral engine, where it's like it's just by itself. We made this cool thing. It can, and people have started using that. Like,
but it's interactive. That's the thing. See, like, if I put it down a fence, what does it do in game? Like, why am I putting it down?
Yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah, and like on top of like all the mystical rules. But for me, it's more just like the visual. Like, I'm tired of seeing like the same ruins and the same ziggurats. I'd like to see a new aesthetic introduced.
Okay, very cool, very cool. Very nice answer. Well, I mean, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Say goodbye to all the boys and girls out in YouTube land. And again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everybody has learned something or has found this chat interesting, because I know Martin Orlando has some of the most interesting insights, and it's always fun to talk to and explore the game and its nuances. So until next time, thank you again, Martin, and we'll see you soon, I'm sure. Take care, guys. Bye.